Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail, the realm where the shadows whisper ancient secrets and nightmares come to life. I am your guide through the darkness, and on this channel, we delve into the spine-chilling world of Wendigo horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. First story. This story was shared by you/conscious, pass 8816. Something's wrong with Bill and Rob. January 18, 2023. Something's wrong with my friends Bill and Rob. They're cousins, or maybe brothers-in-law, I'm not totally sure. They don't seem like either though, they seem more like old buddies who've known each other since they were kids. Lately though, Bill and Rob haven't been acting right. It's not as if they're not themselves. Bill is still sweet, kind, quiet Bill, and Rob is still funny, excitable, smiley Rob. Bill is just quieter and more tired, and Rob is a bit louder and more excitable. I'm just worried because every time I see them they're like this. They also seem to get more easily annoyed with each other. January 19, 2023. Today I saw Bill and Rob in a shouting match. They've never done that before. Usually their arguments and disagreements are kept quiet and just talked about, but today they were screaming at each other. I don't have second-hand embarrassment from everyone staring at them, far from it actually. I'm far more scared because I thought I heard Bill whisper to Rob, after their fight, that he was going to skin him and wear him as a coat. February 16, 2023. I'm really excited. I have a race soon on the 18th and 19th. I get Friday off of school too to travel up to Priest Lake. I like getting days off of school. I hope Bill and Rob figured out whatever was going on with them. It's kind of scary, them yelling at each other. I think I misheard what Bill said though, he's really not like that. It just wouldn't make sense. February 18, 2023. Bill and Rob are both here, it seems like they're doing better too, mostly at least. I think Bill had another spat with his wife. That happens sometimes. It worries me, though, that Rob seems to be a bit out of sorts. He's less excited than usual, more sad even. Blue isn't his color, but red is. He was wearing his signature San Francisco's 49ers hat. I think I might ask him what's going on tomorrow. February 19, 2023. So I asked, because of course I did. He would only say he's going through a bit of a rough time. I asked if he and Bill were doing okay. He just looked at me and shrugged. Maybe they're not doing so good after all. I don't know what I should do. Anyway, I asked if they were gonna go to the Sumter race in a couple weeks. Bill said sure, and Rob smiled and said maybe. I hope they show up. February 24, 2023. Bill's here, but Rob's not. He said Rob couldn't get the time off of work. That's okay though cause Bill's here. He seemed excited to be at this race. I sure hope his sleds don't break, they have a tendency to do that. February 25, 2023. Today is race day. I'm here with my 78 Yamaha Exciter 340, and I am so ready to win. Okay, so it's the end of the day now, I did the math, and I went around that track 51 times. 6 races. 3 laps in heats, 5 in mains. Oh, and an LCQ. That's double my usual amount of laps. Bill was really tired this morning, he almost didn't go to tech check, which was weird, but I guess he's more old and tired without Rob to keep him jumping around. Maybe that's why he's been getting so mad at Rob, he just doesn't want to run around that much. I'm not sure. I talked to him and he said he'd see me next year, so that's cool. I told him to say hi to Rob for me, and he said he would. So maybe they're doing better. I hope so. Bill's here. Rob's not. Bill's coat looks weird today. It's thin and a weird grayish tan color. It's also got a very gray, fluffy hood. It's kind of a weird hood. It looks like Rob's hair when he puts it on. Bill's still old and tired, but now he's got this weird look in his eyes. I can't pinpoint what it is. He just came up to me. I feel disgusted. He put the hood and Rob's 49ers hat on his head and said hi. He was still Bill, but it felt like he was pretending to be Rob. Oh God. I just looked at the sleeves. They have the fingerless hand things on the end. They look like real hands. I don't think I misheard him last year. I think his whispered threat wasn't a threat at all, it was a promise. I think he skinned Rob and made him into a coat. Second story. This story was shared by you/Universe Master on Gram. Wendigo Encounter. By the way, I have posted this here again as it was on my Alt-ACC by accident. This is my first post here, but please read all the way through. This is a real telling of what happened while I was on a cabin trip. Also, I'm on mobile, so sorry for bad formatting. A little backstory. I was 13 at the time, and I come from a family of native Dant, and we believe in many things similar to the Wendigo and Skinwalker, like La Llorona, the Whistling Woman and alike. We also have what some call spiritual gifts that allow us to see evil spirits and negative energy. These gifts are what allow us to see these creatures and spirits, as well as being able to have a connection to God and His angels. We had been wanting to go on another camping trip for ages, and after some debate due to some of my nephews catching a bad cold, it was finally arranged. After arriving at the site, it was as normal than any other trip for the most part. Except there was mad signs of bad luck, a terrible omen, dead birds on the drive, my 7Y brother almost falling outside of our moving car due to a lock malfunction, and during the last few days of the 2-week vacation strange things started happening. Food, drawers, cabinets, doors would be open and random chairs/Tupperware would be missing. But we chalked it up to some rowdy teenagers at the other campsite. Though, we all knew it wasn't just some kids, this was some far more treacherous, but no one wanted to admit that it wasn't as simple as wandering animals or some thieving people. Until some days later, when even stranger things started to occur. Like, hearing footsteps behind us stopping one step after we did, the feeling of being watched, and a strong rancid odor when being completely alone. Imagine feces mixed with hot rotting meat and then thrown into a fire. Although these occurrences were a disturbance, it did not deter us from staying for the final 2 days as we had been planning it for months, but one experience years ago on the day right before our departure, still haunts me to this day. I had been strolling through the forest while looking firewood when I heard rustling in the bushes behind me. As this happened, it seemed that all life ceased around me because I could only hear my heartbeat and the lone heavy footsteps approaching me. Then I heard my name called from what seemed every direction, yet echoed from in front of me while also coming from behind. The voice calling me was a harsh, raspy, animalistic in tone imitation of my sister's voice, who had just recently left the trip due to stress only a few hours ago. This had sent horrendous chills down my spine, so I ran the fastest I've ever had back towards the campsite, while I heard the twigs and leaves crunching behind me. I had finally reached the campsite when the footsteps suddenly stopped. I was relieved and slumped over to the cabin stairs when I slipped on a rock slipping out of the makeshift fire. It had caused me to head straight into it. The blazing force of nature had almost burned my face when I was just stopped mid-fall. I hadn't gained my balance. It was just as if someone was hanging on to me and pulled me back. I'm not sure what it was, but my family suggests that it was my guardian angel saving me from an early death, but after that experience I have never been to the same campsite ever again, and didn't go camping for a few years after that. Still, what really scares me the most from back then was when we had been leaving the site. I looked back from the car window and saw a figure standing at the tree line staring at me. It was lanky and looked starved to the point of having its skin wrapping tightly against its bones. But when I looked onto the pathway, the footprints were completely gone, and as I blinked we rounded the corner and it seemingly vanished into thin air. This has left me questioning what is those woods and was it a reality, but when my sister asked me why I was so shaken I told her what I experienced and her face went pale. She had told me that before leaving a terrifically gaunt figure had been watching us across the river bank, and that it had noticed her and ran away on all four at a fictional speed, she shakily said, staying quite frightened after. Until speaking with a phrase that still haunts me today, before I had left early, that thing had left long, deep, scratch mark on the trail sign. It was the one that it was chased me on. Third story. This story was shared by you/conscious, pass 8816. Something's wrong with Bill and Rob. January 18, 2023. Something's wrong with my friends Bill and Rob. They're cousins, or maybe brothers-in-law, I'm not totally sure. They don't seem like either though. They seem more like old buddies who've known each other since they were kids. Lately though, Bill and Rob haven't been acting right. It's not as if they're not themselves. Bill is still sweet, kind, quiet Bill, and Rob is still funny, excitable, smiley Rob. Bill is just quieter and more tired, and Rob is a bit louder and more excitable. I'm just worried because every time I see them they're like this. They also seem to get more easily annoyed with each other. January 19, 2023. Today I saw Bill and Rob in a shouting match. They've never done that before. Usually their arguments and disagreements are kept quiet and just talked about, but today they were screaming at each other. I don't have second-hand embarrassment from everyone staring at them, far from it actually. I'm far more scared because I thought I heard Bill whisper to Rob, after their fight, that he was going to skin him and wear him as a coat. February 16, 2023. I'm really excited. I have a race soon on the 18th and 19th. I get Friday off of school too to travel up to Priest Lake. I like getting days off of school. I hope Bill and Rob figured out whatever was going on with them. It's kind of scary, them yelling at each other. I think I misheard what Bill said though, he's really not like that. It just wouldn't make sense. February 18, 2023. Bill and Rob are both here. It seems like they're doing better too, mostly at least. I think Bill had another spat with his wife. That happens sometimes. It worries me, though, that Rob seems to be a bit out of sorts. He's less excited than usual, more sad even. Blue isn't his color, but red is. He was wearing his signature San Francisco's 49ers hat. I think I might ask him what's going on tomorrow. February 19, 2023. So I asked, because of course I did. He would only say he's going through a bit of a rough time. I asked if he and Bill were doing okay. He just looked at me and shrugged. Maybe they're not doing so good after all. I don't know what I should do. Anyway, I asked if they were gonna go to the Sumter race in a couple weeks. Bill said sure, and Rob smiled and said maybe. I hope they show up. February 24th, 2023. Bill's here, but Rob's not. He said Rob couldn't get the time off of work. That's okay though, 'cause Bill's here. He seemed excited to be at this race. I sure hope his sleds don't break, they have a tendency to do that. February 25th, 2023. Today is race day. I'm here with my 78 Yamaha Exciter 340, and I am so ready to win. Okay, so it's the end of the day now. I did the math, and I went around that track 51 times. 6 races. 3 laps in heats, 5 in mains. Oh, and an LCQ. That's double my usual amount of laps. Bill was really tired this morning. He almost didn't go to tech check, which was weird, but I guess he's more old and tired without Rob to keep him jumping around. Maybe that's why he's been getting so mad at Rob. He just doesn't want to run around that much. I'm not sure. I talked to him and he said he'd see me next year, so that's cool. I told him to say hi to Rob for me, and he said he would. So maybe they're doing better. I hope so. Bill's here. Rob's not. Bill's coat looks weird today. It's thin and a weird grayish tan color. It's also got a very gray, fluffy hood. It's kind of a weird hood. It looks like Rob's hair when he puts it on. Bill's still old and tired, but now he's got this weird look in his eyes. I can't pinpoint what it is. He just came up to me. I feel disgusted. He put the hood and Rob's 49ers hat on his head and said hi. He was still Bill, but it felt like he was pretending to be Rob. Oh God. I just looked at the sleeves. They have the fingerless hand things on the end. They look like real hands. I don't think I misheard him last year. I think his whispered threat wasn't a threat at all, it was a promise. I think he skinned Rob and made him into a coat. 4th story. This story was shared by you/Miko the Vocaloid. My therapist doesn't know what to do. IF17 have a boyfriend who's M21. I'll call him Jack. Yesterday evening I was getting ready to go to sleep. It was already dark outside, so same as every day my dad turned on the lights in our garden. I was just done switching into my sleepwear when I saw a person standing in front of my window. At first I was really scared and didn't know what to do, but then I decided to maybe try to see who it was. When I was approaching my door, which was a big window at the same time, I saw that the person didn't move, so I opened the door to talk to them. As I was trying to open my door, I recognized the strange figure as my boyfriend. I asked Jack what he was doing in front of my house in the middle of the night, and he stated he just wanted to see me, so I let him in. We were sitting at my bed for a moment and started talking, but then I remembered some Reddit story I saw on TikTok about a man who wanted to let his neighbor in, but he saw the neighbor somewhere else, so he came to the conclusion that the person in front of his door was a skinwalker. In this moment it hit me. This person next to me wasn't my boyfriend, it was a skinwalker. Unfortunately I had already let him in, so I started screaming uncontrollably. My so-called boyfriend was shocked to suddenly seeing me scream like this, and it didn't take long for my sibling 14, my mum 48 and my dad 51 to enter my room. Jack tried to explain them everything, but I screamed my theory about the skinwalker. At first my parents got angry at Jack because they thought he did something to me, but then he explained himself and they started to believe I was hallucinating because I was mentally unstable already. Jack and my mother then decided it was the best to immediately take me to the hospital. On the way there I didn't ever stop screaming because I was so scared for my life. When we got to the hospital, the lady at the reception immediately sent us to an experienced therapist. They all thought I was schizophrenic. We were sent to the therapist's office and the young woman started to slowly calm me down. She told me about how skinwalkers didn't exist and how my boyfriend just looked like one by coincidence. My boyfriend even showed me his phone and ID as a proof it was actually him. As I was calming down I got to an idea though. I told everyone we were leaving for my boyfriend's apartment to prove it was actually empty. The therapist agreed to this as long as she was allowed to come along. When we got there we were looking through my boyfriend's window when in shock we all realized that he was standing inside his bedroom. Now it was my so-called boyfriend who got a panic attack. The therapist couldn't explain what happened, so at that point we were all panicking. The therapist then decided to call 911. We separated so me and my mom were sitting on the other side of the street as my boyfriend and the therapist as we were waiting for the cops. When they finally arrived they immediately told me and my mom to leave and go home safely as this was a special emergency the population shouldn't know about. As we walked back to our car I looked through my boyfriend's window again a last time to check if he was okay, but when I did I saw him grin at me. It wasn't just a normal grin, it was wider and the teeth looked very strange. When we're in the car I saw the police arrest who was the man with me and the hospital. We were driving home when I started rethinking the whole thing. What if my boyfriend was actually with me in the hospital and whoever was in his apartment was the fake Jack? Now I am sitting at my bed in the early hours shaking, hoping for some advice. I tried calling my boyfriend so many times and no answer, not even from the officers. I'm so scared something happened to him, someone please help me. Fifth story. This story was shared by you/one more tired teacher. I found a paper in a drawer that horrified me and changed my life. My husband and I have the best relationship. We have been married for 24 years and counting. He still makes breakfast for me every day and I still tell him I love him every night. We have our divergences, but we work through them as a couple. As a team. It wasn't always like that though. We met almost 30 years ago. I was 19, he was 21. We were madly in love from the start. So much that I thought it would be fitting to change our wedding vows from "till death do you part" to "for eternity." After we had been married for around a year, we started trying for a baby. We tried and tried. Until we learned we couldn't have children. My uterus was the wrong shape, according to the doctor. As in many other cases, this put strain in our relationship. The stress and resentment started to build up on both ends and we started fighting. A lot. First came some small disagreements. Then they started growing and growing. By the end, every small thing would end up in a screaming match. One day, I was doing my stuff around the house and needed to pee. In a hurry, I sat on the toilet without looking. I gasped in horror as my body sank and my butt touched the porcelain inside. I got up and saw the seat was up. I marched to my husband and started yelling at him. Can't you just leave the freaking seat down? Are you that much of a baby? He opened his mouth to answer me, but he just closed it back, closed his eyes and sighed. I need some time alone. With that, he went for the door and left in his car. That night, the police came to my door, telling me he had been in an accident. They said he was at the hospital, in critical condition, and that I should go there as soon as possible. I could not bear my regret. I started sobbing and asked the officers if they could take me there. I was in no condition to drive. They looked at each other and the one by my doorstep said, "Ma'am, this is not standard procedure, but sure, we'll give you a ride." From then on, my memory is patchy. I read that's a normal response to trauma. I remember the doctor saying they weren't sure he was gonna make it. I remember seeing him hooked to all the life support machines at the hospital. Next thing I remember is him at home already. The accident left him on a wheelchair. Because of that, I was now mostly in charge of everything, but he still tried to help. 2 or 3 days after he came home, I remember him saying, "I want to cling to life, and you are my life." From then on, we realized our problems were tiny compared to losing each other, and our fight stopped. We still have disagreements, but we talk about them as a couple. Because of all the trauma and being on a wheelchair, he didn't want to leave the house ever since. I respected his will for years, but at this point, I felt like he really needed to go out. So I booked a surprise vacation for us at a place that is accessible for wheelchairs. Today I was looking for the reservation papers. I'm a bit messy and I lose stuff easily, and I looked in a drawer that I rarely use. I found a paper and checked if it was it. Right now I'm packing. I'm not sure where I'll go, but I'll go alone. My husband asked from the kitchen, "Baby, what are you up to?" And I replied, "Just tidying up the wardrobes." I can't let him know. I mean, how do you tell someone you found their death certificate? Sixth story. This story was shared by you/awa_Mexican. Sweat Lodge Keeper is a skinwalker. I don't know how long I will be on this earth anymore. Sweat Lodge Keeper is a skinwalker. I don't know how long I will be on this earth anymore. My name is Adrian. I am an 18-year-old Native American. I live on the Kihuan Reservation. My favorite sport is lacrosse. I am actually really good at lacrosse. I even played a championship game for my school out on the reservation. My friends, Mason, Dan, and Andrew and I always go to this sweat lodge 4 times a week. The rules in a sweat lodge are very clear and must be followed. You must never talk unless you are asked to speak. Women and men must be on different sides of the lodge. The women must sit like mermaids, never with legs crossed. Only the men in the lodge sit with their legs crossed. It's forbidden for a woman to enter the sweat on her moon time. She must wait until her time is done. All women have to cover their bodies neck to toe, usually wearing tall gowns and long pants. You cannot wear accessories as our first ancestors came with nothing on their first days on the physical earth. As the keeper says, never bring any negative energies inside of the lodge. Every 4 sessions lasts from up to 45 minutes. Sometimes these sweats can be as long as 5 hours. The sweat lodge works by using really hot rocks that have been sitting in the fire for hours. The keeper splashes water onto the rocks, causing really hot steam inside of the sweat. It's dark. When I say dark, it's dark. You literally cannot even see your own hands. Even close up. The sweat has a keeper. The keeper is the one who runs the lodge and sends prayers throughout the world. In my reservation, the keeper's name was Lawrence. We call him Larry for short. I found this man weird. He was always twitching in inhuman manners. He always had coyote pelts, sometimes he would even wear one as a cloak. I never thought much of it at all, I always just thought he was connected to the spirit of the animal. Sometimes his stare gave me chills down my spine, his eyes had no life in them. They just terrorized me. His eyes were similar to that of a coyote, his voice was erratic. But other than this, he was a normal man. I enjoyed his company. He was usually an understanding man and taught me many native teachings and folklore. He knew a lot of teachings I never even heard any elder mention in my life. Lawrence always gave off a weird energy, sometimes the energy felt the same as staring at an animal straight into the eyes at midnight. The bright yellow eyes. Something felt off about him. His pupils were oddly very small, with the rest of the eyes larger. This gave him a terrifying look. His drumming and singing was powerful, his drumming felt like an ocean wave hitting against me. His singing sounded like a ritualistic chant, comparable to a wolf chuffing. If this all doesn't weird you out, sometimes his eyes glow firing red, with white pupils. I've noticed this only happens when he has the skin of a coyote on his back, especially when he wears the coyote. His hands and feet were really abnormal compared to a normal human's hands and feet. They had webs in between the fingers, his nails were similar to claws. Lawrence is a man who lives in a small home on the reservation, far off into the wooded areas. He lives alone, his house was created all by his work. By the way, not to mention his indigenous name is which translates into walking coyote. This name can explain his passion for coyotes. My friends Mason, Dan, Andrew and I are crazy F***ers, we would always whistle after 9 o'clock at night. When we did, I would always hear something running inside of the woods, we all F***king hated the running footsteps. Sometimes we would even get a reply back with whistling, a few times we would hear screams from hell, from quite literally hell. They didn't even sound human, the screams weren't just screams. They were animal-like screeches, they always had coyotes and lynx-like screams. We all were the troublemakers of the reservation, so our names are always known when mentioned. No one says, who, what, when we are mentioned. Except for Lawrence, I don't know why everyone doesn't like talking about him. They all tried to keep Lawrence a secret, only a few people knew him. They were all elders, nobody younger than 40 knew him. Only Mason, Dan, Andrew and I were the only younger ones who knew him. I don't know why the elders would always shush us when we mentioned walking coyote. Right after the sweat sessions were done, I would always help Lawrence clean up the sweat lodge. Sometimes he would invite me to go find rocks in the river for the next sweat. Lawrence and I had the strongest relationship out of Mason, Dan and Andrew. Our sweat is shaped like a pregnant woman's stomach, the materials used to shape the sweat are willow and deer skin. In the winter, the sweat is protected inside of a warm cozy cabin. Yesterday, Lawrence was acting a bit unusual compared to how abnormal he already is. Yesterday, his coyote skin cloak had feathers and coyote teeth as earrings on the coyote's ears. His eyes were even creepier, his pupils were tinier as the rest of the eyes were shaped more circle-like, almost like a goat's eye. Not weird enough, he grew a few inches taller. He called us into the sweat, we all entered the sweat. The spirits are ready, whenever you are, Lawrence announced. Confused as we are now silenced because the sweat has already started. He also announced that an elder is visiting us in the second round, the elder wouldn't be male, he stated. Rather, the elder was female. We never usually had a female visitor. Suddenly, I heard Mason, Dan and Andrew choking. They were suffocating and Lawrence kept on drumming as usual. I got worried and asked him to stop the sweat. He silenced me and told me not to worry because they are going to be safe in the spirit life. He kept on going chanting and drumming, and I finally had realized that Lawrence is a powerful evil witch. I wanted out. I tried to open the sweat lodge door, except Lawrence grabbed my leg and told me not to worry because I am safe. When I sat down, I closed my eyes, shutting tightly. Out of command, my eyes were forced open. I couldn't close them. Damn right, I couldn't even squint my eyes. I saw two eyes. Two red eyes, that glow. The two eyes had white pupils. The second round has reached, the elderly women came inside. It was Kokum, she liked it when we called her Kokum. She greeted me and held my hand, then she went to the opposite side of the room from me. I kept my head down in fear, my body couldn't help but tremble. I cried to myself, because on the second round Mason, Dan and Andrew had just disappeared into the thin air. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I broke the lodge door and ran out of the sweat. I still heard the drumming afar from me. The drumming was getting more aggressive as the farther I ran. The chants were no longer a human's chant, the chant was the sound of a coyote yipping and howling. I ran into the forest, I hid inside of a bush. Suddenly, the drumming had stopped. I heard a blood-curdling scream from afar. I didn't look, I couldn't move from the amount of shock my body handled. I could hear a coyote running, not to mention it's winter. I heard canine-like footsteps running. It was approximately 25 meters away from me, according to myself. The same footsteps me and my friends heard. The coyote was 20 meters away, now 10 meters away from the forest. The footsteps gave me trauma. But then the walking coyote turned the other direction. As I got the chance, I ran out of the bush from the forest. I heard the bastard following me. The thing was taunting me, it would stop for a while, and then it would run again. I ran until I reached my auntie's house. The coyote backed away because my auntie was burning cedar. Skinwalkers do not like cedar. My auntie, worried for me. She knew what exactly happened. She told me I didn't need to explain because she understands. She gave me warm chicken noodle soup, and a piece of baked bannock. She put me to bed. I'm traumatized. The coyote is peering through my window. I am writing this at night. The coyote won't leave me alone. The eyes unsettle me. The eyes are human. The coyote is tall and stands on its hind legs staring at me through the window, not to mention the arms are the shape of Lawrence's arm. My auntie told me to stay inside of my room. I have cedar burning inside of this room. My auntie had told me it's better to stay here, because if I leave the room, the coyote would climb inside of the chimney. It's funny because my window is 7 feet above the grass, and the walking coyote is standing with its hands peering through. My auntie has no neighbors with her. All I can do is sit in my room, hoping I would be saved by someone. Somehow. My auntie tried to contact a medicine man to send spiritual help from afar. I'm staring into Lawrence's eyes as I'm writing this. 7th story. This story was shared by you/The Darkness Diaries. Skinwalker sighting, the haunting of the Navajo Reservation. I've always been a skeptic. Ghosts, aliens, monsters, they were all just stories to me. But after what I experienced in the Southwest, my perspective on the unknown has been forever altered. I was on a road trip with my best friend, Jake. We had decided to take a detour through the Navajo Reservation in Arizona, mainly because of the scenic beauty and the rich history of the area. We had heard tales of skinwalkers, but we laughed them off. They were just myths, right? Our first day on the reservation was uneventful. We visited a few local spots, interacted with some of the locals, and set up camp near a canyon. As night fell, we sat around our campfire, sharing stories and enjoying the serenity of the desert. Around midnight, Jake decided to turn in. I stayed up, mesmerized by the stars. The Milky Way stretched across the sky, and I felt a profound sense of peace. That is, until I heard it. A low, guttural growl echoed through the canyon. I froze, thinking it might be a coyote or a mountain lion. But then, I heard a voice. It was distorted, as if someone was speaking through a broken radio, but it was unmistakably Jake's voice. "Come here," it beckoned. Confused, I turned to our tent. Jake was sound asleep. The voice called out again, this time from the opposite direction. I grabbed a flashlight and shone it towards the source. What I saw will haunt me forever. Standing on a ridge was a figure. It looked like a man, but its limbs were elongated, and its eyes glowed a sickly yellow. It wore tattered clothing, and its skin was a mottled gray. But the most disturbing part was its face. It was Jake's face. I stumbled back, my heart racing. The creature mimicked Jake's voice again, "Come here." It took a step towards me, its movements jerky and unnatural. Suddenly, I felt a sharp pain on my arm. Looking down, I saw a deep scratch, blood oozing out. The creature had marked me. I bolted to the tent, shaking Jake awake. "We need to go. Now," I hissed. As we sped away in our car, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The creature stood in the middle of the road, watching us, its yellow eyes glowing in the darkness. We didn't stop driving until we reached the nearest town. We checked into a motel, and I spent the night researching skinwalkers. The legend said they were witches who could take the form of animals or people, using their voices to lure victims. The next few nights were restless. I'd wake up to that same distorted voice calling my name, and the scratch on my arm seemed to burn and throb. It was clear that the creature had not only marked me but was now haunting my every move. Jake and I decided to consult a local Navajo elder. He told us that by interacting with the skinwalker, I had inadvertently invited it into my life. The only way to rid myself of its torment was to confront it and perform a purification ritual. With heavy hearts, we returned to the reservation. The confrontation with the skinwalker was terrifying, but with the elder's guidance, we managed to complete the ritual. The haunting ceased, but the scars, both physical and emotional, remain. The Southwest is beautiful, but it holds secrets that are beyond comprehension. And I'll never set foot on the Navajo reservation again. To all of you reading this, please, be careful when you venture into unknown territories. Some legends are rooted in truth, and some nightmares are very, very real. 8th story. This story was shared by you/Teabags. I think I had a run-in with a skinwalker last night and I'm afraid it might come back. This entire thing happened last night and I still don't know how to feel about it. I'm honestly still shaken up. I'm afraid that my dogs might get hurt, or even my family. So I've come here in search of advice as to what I should do now. It must have happened around 8-ish, when my mom's girlfriend called me downstairs. She had asked me to help her burn some of the boxes we had lying around in the kitchen so we could clear up some space. We live in a pretty small house, 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom for 5 people. I have 2 younger sisters, one I share a room with, 12, and the other, 10, sleeps in the living room most nights, and we live with my mother, her girlfriend, who is very very mentally ill, mind you, and my dog Kobe, about 2 years old, Valentine, who we've had for 6 years, and their 3 puppies. So there really isn't a lot of room to go around and we could use that extra leg room. So I agreed and we took the boxes out from the house and into the backyard. Our backyard is the biggest in our small neighborhood and is not fenced in. And we are also one of the only houses on the block that has a shed, which is identical to our next-door neighbors. Our driveway reaches over to our shed, and since the yard is open they both sort of connect. Anyway, while she was breaking said boxes down and lighting them on fire, I'm not permitted to use the lighter. I was putting Kobe out on the chain to use the bathroom. Don't worry. His chain doesn't reach all the way across our yard and he was far away from the fire, while Valentine is roaming around the yard. The fire goes fine and we burn about 2 or 3 big boxes with no problems. Everything was very under control and we were even having fun with it. Around the end of the fire when the flames had started to fade away, Kobe started running back and forth from the driveway to near where we were, barking frantically and trying very hard to get off of his chain like he was afraid and was warning us of something. When this happened, I also noticed that Valentine was growling in the driveway. So I got up and walked over to him to see what was wrong, and I smiled and asked him, "What's the matter?" in that sort of baby voice. But while I was standing there, I got that feeling. You know, the one where you know you're not alone. I could feel someone's eyes looking right through me. I looked over in the direction of Valentine's barking, and I instinctively yelled, "Oh my God," at what I saw. There was this inhuman-looking thing standing in the driveway only a few feet away from me. Despite having the light from the back door being open and the fire nearby, this thing was completely black. All I could see was its bulging eyes staring right through me, never wavering. It was so thin and tall. Standing much taller than the small shed at the end of the driveway. Easily 7 feet tall. And God, I could just feel that something was completely off about this thing. Some voice in the back of my head was telling me, this thing wants to hurt. It's so angry, and it was like me and this thing were having a staring contest. I heard my mom's girlfriend ask me what was wrong and I looked away for just a second, and it was gone. Completely disappeared, but I could still feel its energy looming around. When I told mom's girlfriend what happened, we put out the fire and we brought the dogs inside. I ran to my mom and told her the same thing I had told her girlfriend, and she tried to give me logical explanations to what I saw, but none of them really made sense. She must have seen that I was afraid and wanted to comfort me, but her excuses gave me no comfort. After that, I went up to my room with Kobe and I tried to shake off that feeling that thing had left me with, but honestly I couldn't. I was struggling for a while. I stayed up there talking with my boyfriend for maybe 15 to 20 minutes before I heard my mom calling for me from downstairs. Her and her GF had gotten into a fight and she had locked herself in the bathroom. Mom was fine with it and simply told me to keep an eye on the food while she went to pick up my sisters from their friends' houses. So I said, okay, and went to do so while she left out the front door. Not even 2 minutes later, my mom comes rushing back inside and I hear her walk into the hallway where the bathroom is and say, *girlfriend's name*, there's something standing outside watching the house, and my heart sank. She finally believed me. So GF comes out from the bathroom and says that she had seen the same thing trying to peek into the windows from the bathroom, and she immediately ran to their room to grab her metal bat and she ran out the back door, screaming, "If anybody's out here I'll bash your fucking head in," at the top of her lungs. Regardless of the situation, my mom still had to pick up the kids. So I walked her out to the car, then quickly retreated back inside and grabbed a hammer from the closet. Kobe started slamming himself into the back door, screaming bloody murder out of absolutely nowhere. I had never seen him do anything like it before. So reluctantly I put him on his chain so he could protect the GF while she was on the lookout. While this happened, I hid myself in the bathroom, since it's one of the only rooms in the house with a working lock, and I called my grandma who was at work and told her everything. She's a huge believer in this kind of stuff just like I am. So she listened to what I had to say and tried to calm me down since I was absolutely losing my shit. I am normally a pretty mature and rational person, but I just felt so unsafe and everything felt off. Just when things started to calm down, the girlfriend comes running into the house and tells me urgently that something had broken the basement window from the outside and she was afraid it had gotten into the house. So I hung up on Grandma after saying goodbye, had 911 on speed dial, and we went to check. Didn't see anybody. Searched around the house and nearby and found nothing. It was like this thing was taunting us. The kids and Mom came back and still things had seemed to cool down, but I could still feel that off and uneasy feeling. Like it wasn't actually gone. Like it was waiting for the right opportunity. Grandma had called me back to say that she would be taking me to her house for the night, as I'm homeschooled unlike my sisters and it wouldn't be an issue. The kids would sleep upstairs with doors locked, Kobe with them, and the hammer I had from before. Grandma came and picked me up after work, and on the way to her house she told me that while I was explaining all this, the hairs on her arms had stood up and she could feel the negative energy that I was telling her about. Like she knew exactly how I felt when I said something was definitely wrong and unnatural about this thing that was tormenting us. Later on this morning, I got a call from Mom saying that after I left she had invited some friends over to keep her company, ones with conceal and carries, and she had went to grab something from the kitchen, which is where the back door is located, and she heard Kobe's chain rattling outside and something's weight shifting on the back porch right next to the door, when everybody was inside and Kobe was upstairs. I don't know. Laying in bed and thinking about it, I think that this thing was trying to latch itself to the dogs, and that's why Kobe felt the need to be outside. He's been keeping very close to me since I've come home, and I have been very wary about going outside by myself while it's dark. I just came here hoping that someone could offer some sort of advice as to what I should do. I've dealt with paranormal stuff practically my entire life and this feels completely different. If anybody knows what I should do, please reach out or comment on this post. I'm desperate to protect my family. 9th story. This story was shared by you/NorthCoast10. I think I encountered a Wendigo. My wife and I have been running the rat race for years, with a family, a house in the city, 2 dogs, a cat, the stereotypical American dream. But the city took its toll, the neighborhood got worse, the crime rose, and we found ourselves looking for a way out. Our opportunity came when I was offered a new job out of state. It was a great career move, but we didn't want to move to a new city just to have the same problems again. So we started looking around and found a great mountain community about an hour and a half from the job, and a great ranch-style house with a big back porch, windows everywhere, and a lot of property. The backyard has a big grassy area, and a creek that cuts the property in half, then acres of woods beyond. It's huge. The house is more than twice the size of our house in the city, it's all updated, and has no neighbors within a mile. It's a radical change from the life we lived in the city, but best of all, it was less than half of what we were paying for our old house. The house was a foreclosure, and when we asked the listing agent about it, she simply said the old family had abandoned the property. We really didn't think anything of it. The first 3 months were uneventful, with us settling into our new life, the kids getting used to the new school and new friends, and most of all, us getting used to the big house and property. But then the weather turned cold and things started to get weird on the property. It started with noises from the back property. Things we chalked up to being in the woods, then the motion lights around the house started going off randomly. Once again we just chalked it up to being in the woods. But last night, it all changed. Last night was the most terrifying night of my life. One of the dogs was at the back door whining and scratching. I assumed he needed to go to the bathroom, so I grabbed my flashlight and walked out the back door. Instantly something felt off. The dog bolted for the back property, growling and snarling. It was a cold night, about 30 degrees, but the dog plunged straight into the creek and out the other bank, running off into the woods in the back of the property. Flashlight bouncing, I ran after him, calling his name. I got to the creek and made my way across the makeshift bridge, trying desperately to follow him. I could hear the dog still growling and barking from somewhere up ahead, and I pushed further away from the safety of the house and deeper into the woods. That's when I heard it. A shriek like I've never heard before in my life. It was a mix of a moaning wail and metal on metal. It echoed through the trees and then froze me in my tracks. My dog bounded its way back to me and cowered down behind me. I turned around and could just make out the warm glow of the house behind me, and the cold dark ahead of me. I swung my flashlight around wildly looking for the source of the noise. And that's when I heard an even more terrifying noise. Out of the cold silence, my wife's voice floated all around me. "Babe," the voice called out. I whipped back around and could just barely make out the image of my wife, safely inside our house. The voice called out again. "Babe, I'm right here," came the voice from deeper into the woods. Then came another voice, just as clear as the other. It was my dad's voice. "Come out here," it called. I swung the flashlight around again and this time caught the briefest glint of light bouncing off of eyes. The creature was in my beam of light for barely a second, but it was tall, maybe 6 feet, and ashen white. It had long spindly fingers that grasped the trunk of a pine tree, and then it was gone. I turned back and ran towards the house. I ran headlong into the icy creek and stumbled. My dog ran past me, making it back to the yard and up to the porch. I dug my hands into the freezing, muddy bank and pulled myself out, not stopping to look back. When I reached the porch, I scrambled inside. My wife ran over to me, asking what had happened. I just shook my head. I'm not certain myself what happened. I had a growing sense of dread tonight as the sun began to fall. We kept the dogs inside, and I haven't dared to look out the back. But as I sit here typing, one by one, my motion lights in the backyard keep going on. 10th story. This story was shared by you/group. I received an emergency alert while ice fishing. The emergency alert on my phone went off with a shrill noise, repeating 3 times and vibrating angrily, just as I was bringing the last of my belongings into the cabin. I took the device from my pocket and stared at it in disbelief for at least a minute before the realization set in that I would have to leave, only moments after arriving. My hands were shaking from the cold as I read through it again. Severe weather alert, heavy snowfall in the Frontenac region is expected to begin tomorrow. 60 to 80 centimeters of precipitation. Not good. I realized the roads would be impassable by this time the following day. That meant I would have to leave early the next morning to avoid being stuck on the roads in the blizzard. Which subsequently meant 0 ice fishing time for me. I'd be lucky to make it home before it started coming down in earnest. Moments later, messages started coming in from my 3 friends who had planned to join me. The group chat notification popped up on my phone and I opened it. Matt, did you see the emergency alert about the storm? I guess the trip's off. What a bunch of bullshit. Ted, OMFG. A generational storm is what they're calling it now. Looks like we'll have to postpone for a few weeks. I hope you didn't go through with your plan to go up a day early, Jay. Greg, no kidding. What are the chances this blizzard hits on our ice fishing weekend? I messaged back, saying I understood we'd have to reschedule. I told them that I'd made the trip up alone, accompanying the messages with forehead-slapping emojis. It sucks that I'll be stuck up here alone, I thought to myself. My dog, Gibson, pawed at my leg and I smiled at her, feeling slightly reassured by her presence. Yeah, you're right, Gibby. I'm not completely alone. At least, I've got you here with me. After putting down a bowl of water and another containing kibble, my next priority was to start a fire in the small black stove at the center of the main living area. There was wood stacked up in a neat pile next to it and small bags containing kindling which we brought with us in the summer and left behind. At first glance it looked like a large enough stack, but I knew from experience I would need twice as much as it appeared to make it through the night, so I went outside to gather more from beneath the boathouse. The family cottage was a rustic one, to put it mildly. There was no running water, no electricity, and the cabin was poorly insulated. Perennially procrastinated repairs were needed in more than one place, including the floor beneath one bed which had partially collapsed, letting in a slight trickle of cold air from outside. It was drafty and I could hear the sounds of mice which had made their way in through the gaps, burrowing in the bedroom and finding their way into an old coat or a sleeping bag that someone had left behind. I sighed as I lit the kerosene lamps which were scattered on wobbly tables around the main living area. There was something about having vermin in the cottage that set me on edge. But at least Gibson's presence would keep them at a distance. After filling the place with a warm flickering glow from the half-dozen kerosene lamps, I felt a little better. There was reassurance in having fire, and I started working on making a big one in the stove that would keep me warm through the night. I loosely wadded up some newspaper and then stacked dry kindling on top, making a teepee. Over that, I added larger pieces of wood, until it was piled up to the ceiling of the small stove. Then I lit a strip of cardboard and held it up to the paper inside, catching it alight from several places, watching as it began to burn, and then flared up in a bright, white-orange glow. Holding my hands up to the fire, I watched it and warmed myself up. Eventually I took off my boots and my coat, the entire cottage gradually getting toasty. There was no sense unpacking, I thought, taking a beer out of the cooler and opening it. I took a sip and couldn't help but grimace at the taste. I'd never tried the brand before and I'd picked it up on a recommendation. It was awful. And lukewarm to boot. Par for the course considering the trip so far. I took out my phone and watched Netflix while the beer went flat beside me. I lifted Gibson up onto the futon with me, so that she was off the floor, and close to the fire where it was warm. Eventually I got bored of office reruns and called it a night, adding another log to the fire and reminding myself to wake up in an hour to keep it going. Pulling the futon even closer to the stove so that it was as close to the fire as safety would allow, I curled up in my sleeping bag and drifted off into an uncomfortable slumber, constantly tossing and turning, trying to stay warm but not succeeding. I woke up to the sound of whining coming from Gibson trembling on the bed beside me. I was so cold that I was actually scared. My teeth were chattering uncontrollably and I realized a few hours had passed. The fire had gone out completely, reduced to mere embers at the base of the stove. I put on my jacket and blew hot breath onto my fingers, pulling Gibson closer to me. She was shaking badly as well. My hands were trembling as I put more newspaper and kindling onto the fire, blowing into the embers and hoping they would reignite. My lungs felt frozen and my heart was beating fast, my skin prickling with pins and needles turning into total numbness in my extremities. I'd never felt so cold in my life, and realized it was far beyond the weather forecasted on the news. It seemed like it was -30 degrees, and steadily dropping further. Terrified that I would not be able to get my body temperature back up, my mind started racing, thinking of worst-case scenarios. If I couldn't stop shaking pretty soon, it would be impossible to start a fire again. I recalled that my truck was just outside, and I could get in there and start it up, turning on the heat until I felt warm again. But the idea of getting out there and the truck refusing to start was too much to take. And considering the state of the beat-up old Ford, that seemed like a distinct possibility. So I continued stoking the fire, blowing on the precious few embers and adding more newspaper every so often, until a tiny flame had begun to grow. I held my shaking hands up to the measly fire and added pieces of kindling sparingly, one by one, terrified of it going out again. Pulling Gibson closer, we shared each other's warmth and I began to feel half human again. A sound came from outside the cabin suddenly, startling me and causing me to jump, my heart skipping a beat then pounding faster and faster in my chest. A noise like fingernails being dragged across the siding could be heard from all around, echoing in the small space. Something was going from one end of the cottage to the other, attempting to get inside. Deep, guttural breathing could be heard, grunting and snorting, desperate as it scraped its talons against the boarded-up windows. Gibson began to whine, making high-pitched noises as she huddled closer to me, and I put my hand over her muzzle, muffling her sounds. Was it a bear? I wondered, and realized I was holding my breath. I thought about the holes in the flimsy facade of the cabin. The spot beneath the bed where mice were getting in. I thought about the broken screen door and the wooden one behind that which needed to be replaced, almost falling off its rusty hinges. The entire cottage felt so frail and insecure all of a sudden, as I heard the loud noise of whatever that thing was, breathing heavily just outside, trying to get in. Maybe it was too cold out there even for it. The ground shook with the weight of the creature as it made its way around the cabin. I was so focused on it that I didn't notice the fire going out again at first, as it fizzled down to embers. I continued holding my breath until it was gone. And then I relit the fire, my shaking hands barely able to get it going again. Once it was burning hot, I didn't sleep anymore. I pulled Gibson close and the two of us stayed up all night watching the fire with weary eyes, taking occasional glances at the door. Even once we were both warm, we continued to shiver. When the sun came up, I didn't notice at first. It was dark in the cottage 1 minute and then it was light. I blinked my eyes a few times and rolled out of bed, deciding I would waste no more time before leaving. I just hoped the bear or whatever had been outside the night before was gone. Gibson was scratching at the front door, asking to be let outside to pee, which told me it was probably safe now. In the light of the morning, all that had happened seemed like a bad nightmare, and I told myself maybe it had been. Until I got outside and saw the claw marks which marred the exterior walls. Shuddering, I threw my belongings in the truck, doused the fire with too much water, and took one last look at the place. What a shitty weekend this turned out to be, I thought to myself. With more people around, it was easier to keep the fire going, taking turns feeding it with wood so that everyone could sleep through the night. But it was frightening being up here by myself, even with Gibson by my side. I'd never done it before in the winter and I never would again. There were too many things that could go wrong. A freak snowstorm, a fallen tree blocking the road, getting stuck or going into a ditch, and those were just the beginning. I wanted to get out of here before any of those things happened. The truck didn't want to start at first. I turned the key in the ignition twice, hearing only a click and the absence of any engine noise. Cursing loudly, I checked to make sure I hadn't left an interior light on, or something which could have drained the battery. Satisfied there was still a charge, I tried one more time, and finally the old shitbox let out a cough and kicked into life. The engine began to sputter, before finally settling into a steady, rusted purr. "All right, Gibson. Let's get out of here," I said, rubbing the dog's head and smiling as she blinked her eyes. She looked content in the front seat, happy to be back in the truck and out of the old cottage. There was a thin layer of snow on the gravel road, and the tires got moving easily enough. I looked up to see the sky was turning gray above me, and a few white flakes were just beginning to fall. The weather was making an early appearance. I turned on the radio and sure enough they said the same thing I was thinking. The storm would be arriving early. By noon, the highway would be a parking lot. Whiteout conditions. Be prepared to be trapped in your car. Have emergency supplies ready. My anxiety was through the roof as I went around a bend in the road. Hitting the gas, I came to the first big hill and went over it, seeing something strange up ahead as I came over the rise. Whatever it was blocking the road. Massive and brown, the lumpy, furry shape got bigger as I pulled up in front of it. The bear which had been trying to get into my cottage the night before was dead. Lying in the middle of the gravel road and blocking it completely. At first I thought it had frozen to death. I got out of my truck to inspect it and was surprised to find there was a horrible smell coming from the carcass. It was a chemical smell, noxious and unpleasant, like some sort of factory waste. The snow had melted all around the beast, and blood and entrails were pooling around the far side. What the hell could do such a thing? Aren't bears at the top of the food chain? Alpha predators? Gibson was by my side, but she did not venture near the body. Usually she would be curious, trying to sniff at something like that, but she stayed next to me, emitting a low growl. The road was completely blocked, I realized. There was no way out. Not unless I could move it. But no matter which way I attempted it, the giant body of the dead bear would not budge. It weighed a ton. There were large trees on either side of the road, too close to drive past. There was only one other way out, which was by driving across the frozen lake, and that way was risky. I hadn't been able to test the thickness of the ice yet. It would need to be nearly a foot deep for me to feel comfortable. But there was a clear way on and off the ice, if it came down to it. I got back in the truck and threw it in reverse, since there was nowhere to turn around. I felt sick to my stomach, nervous with anticipation and fear, uncertain of how I was going to get out of here. Once back in front of the cottage, I got out of the truck and went down to the ice with my spud. Walking out onto the lake, I cleared a spot with my boot and began to dig with the sharpened metal rod. Satisfied that I'd found the bottom of the ice, I put the tape measure through the hole, hoping it would be close to a foot. Looking at the tape measure, my heart sank. The ice was barely 7 inches thick. Just below the minimum 8 inches where it would be safe to drive a vehicle across. And my truck was on the heavier side. I would feel more comfortable if it was a full foot thick or more. I pulled out my phone and checked for a signal, deciding it was time to call someone for help. Who I would call, I still wasn't sure, but I knew I couldn't get out of this jam by myself. Of course, I muttered out loud, seeing the signal bar was down to 0, and the words, "No service," were printed across the top of the screen. Surely I would have gotten another severe weather alert by now, I realized, had it not been for the total lack of cell signal. Because snow was now being dumped down on me from above, and the sky had turned nearly black with the approaching storm. I typed out a message in the group chat, telling them my situation, hitting send regardless of the lack of signal. I knew from experience that it would go through eventually. I just hoped it would be sooner rather than later. Gibson let out a loud, high-pitched whine. Her tone rose in volume and she began to bark. High, persistent yips that were totally unlike her. She backed away, then let out a stream of urine, her hind legs trembling as she did. I looked up from my phone and saw what her eyes had spotted. Across the lake, something was moving in the trees. I saw fingers wrapping around a tree trunk, too high up, the nails too long and too sharp to be a person's. Whatever this giant was, it looked similar to a man, but it was massive. It peered out at me from between the boughs of trees, its head probably 15 feet off the ground. Its skeletal limbs matched the monochromatic tone of the birches on either side of it, a gray, pale white shade. I couldn't distinguish the entire form of it in the shadows, but I could make out its eyes. They reflected back at me, catching the gray light coming through the clouds. And then I saw its mouth spread wider in a grin, teeth dripping blood, and it disappeared back into the darkness. The temperature felt like it had dropped to 30 below freezing again, as I began to shiver involuntarily and looked down to see Gibson was doing the same. There was only one choice. Only one place where we could go. The cabin. It was either that or risk plunging the truck into a frozen lake, attempting to drive across. We were on a small peninsula, surrounded by water on all sides, only one way in or out. And that way was blocked by the body of a giant brown bear. I took the dog back inside the cottage and locked the doors, taking uneasy glances outside through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. What the hell was that thing in the forest? I asked myself over and over again. But no answer would come to mind. There was no creature I could think of that was 15 feet tall, with reflective eyes, which stood on two legs like a man. Capable of disemboweling a full-grown bear. Capable of causing the temperature to plunge all around me. There was only one creature capable of that. And it wasn't supposed to exist. It was something from myth and from folklore, from legends that aren't supposed to be real. It's a Wendigo, I said aloud, immediately regretting the words, as if saying them made it true. As if saying them would summon it. Wendigos are supernatural creatures born of Canadian First Nations folklore. They live in cold, remote places, and make people go mad merely through their presence. They thrive on the hunger, despair, and loneliness of their victims, who usually live in remote communities. They drive families apart, instilling urges of cannibalism in people and making them want to consume their own loved ones, during the lean, hard months of winter. They turn people into raving cannibals, driving away all their loved ones. And then, once you're alone, the Wendigo strikes. It either consumes you while you're still alive, tearing the flesh from your bones while you beg and scream, or it turns you into one of its own kind. But the Wendigo's greatest curse is that no matter how much flesh it consumes, it only grows hungrier. With every ounce of meat it takes in, it grows taller and more emaciated. Its hunger grows more insatiable with its height, until it is a towering beast with its head amongst the treetops as it roams the forest, constantly searching for its next meal. Gibson whimpered and burrowed her face into my armpit, as if hearing my inner thoughts. Trying to reassure her, I stroked her fur and told her it would be okay, although I had a feeling it wouldn't be. I tried to get the fire going again, but it was a fruitless effort. Everything inside the stove was damp and wet, and I scolded myself for dousing the fire with so much water. Still, I kept at it, knowing we might be stuck there for a while. Pretty soon the wind was howling and blowing outside and the snow was piling up in front of the door. I made a point of opening it every so often and clearing the front steps, knowing that I would need firewood, taking weary glances off into the forest across the lake as I did so. Finally I got the fire started, a low, guttering flame in the stove which wanted to go out all the time. Everything was damp but I kept feeding fresh kindling into it, nursing it until it kept going by itself. Hours passed as we waited to either run out of firewood or be attacked by the creature. We were running low on kindling and the sun was beginning to set, my stomach rumbling with hunger, when I felt something strange. The ground was suddenly shaking beneath my feet and I heard Gibson whining from beside me. "What is it, girl?" I asked, my voice catching in my throat as I realized the answer. It was the creature. It was back. The dining table began to rattle and bounce up and down as whatever was outside got closer, and I imagined the huge creature lifting the roof from the cabin like the cloche on a dish in a fancy restaurant, picking me up and eating me whole, like a wriggling shrimp. A second later there was a sound at the front door of metal being ripped and sheared as I realized the creature was making its way in. The screen door landed on the ground with a crash and then the wooden door was being torn from its hinges an instant later. Cold air rushed inside as Gibson began to let out shrill, panicked barks of terror. I heard the thing tearing apart the front entrance, easily ripping apart the wood and making the doorway larger so that it could come inside. I tipped over the dining room table to use it as a barricade. I picked up a chair, the only weapon I could find nearby, thinking I would throw it at the thing's face to defend us, when I heard a strange noise from out front. It was a car horn honking. Someone had come to save me. I heard a loud ding and pulled out my phone and saw the green check mark beside my group chat message, indicating at some point it had gone through, at some brief moment when there'd been a gap in the clouds. Reading the one new received message on my phone, a hopeful smile spread across my face. Matt, you just had to skip town a day early and go ice fishing, didn't you? What the hell is that thing? Ted was yelling from outside. I don't know, but it's trying to get inside. Jay. Are you there? I shouted back that I was. There was a loud screech from outside which I realized had come from the monster. They'd actually wounded it somehow. I ran to the front door with Gibson and looked up, seeing the creature for the first time. It stood with its back to us, its head among the treetops, even taller than it had appeared at first. My friends had caught it off guard, but now it was fully aware of them, and it was going after them. The Wendigo was distracted by something in front of the cottage, and I realized one of my friends had gotten out of the car and they were using themselves as bait, so that I could flee the cottage safely. They had driven across the ice with their lighter vehicle, just as I had hoped to do. I guessed that they'd also run into trouble moving the body of the giant bear which blocked the road. Jay! Ted screamed out the window, driving the car in circles on the ice, as if too terrified to stay still. I raced over to the car, slipping and sliding on the lake ice. It was Matt who was distracting the Wendigo, I realized, and I called for him to get away from the thing. It was too large and too fast. He didn't know what he was dealing with, but that was Matt. He was always the act first, think later type. Not only that, but he often put himself in harm's way for his friends. He turned to look at me and gave a thumbs up, his attention diverted from the creature for a split second too long. As Gibson and I got into the car, we heard his screams, and I looked to see the Wendigo had closed the distance in an instant, and was picking him up like an insect, turning him and taking bites from him in places. As Matt screamed for help, the creature peeled off his skin, exposing his skull as he ate his face. The calls for help turned to bubbling gurgles and wet, choked sounds, and I nearly got out of the car to run after him, but Ted grabbed my wrist and pulled me back inside. You can't save him, he said with wet, red-rimmed eyes, and eventually I relented. We raced away across the icy lake, making a path through the blizzard, cutting a swath out of the fresh fallen snow on our way back to the main roads. For a while we debated what to do. Should we call the police? Our friend had just died after all. But we knew that if we did we would be considered suspects. And with no other reasonable explanation, they would pin the death on us. They would say we killed him. There was no box you could check on an official police report, citing a Wendigo attack, after all. Such things didn't exist. They were myths. Legends. As it turned out, we wouldn't have to worry about it. A message popped up from Matt on the group chat just a few minutes after we got home, and I had to tell myself it wasn't all just a nightmare, hallucination from the cold and from lack of sleep and food. But Ted and Greg both told me I hadn't imagined it. What we saw was real. As much as I wish it wasn't. The three of us read the message on the group chat again and again. My heart was beating fast and a sick knot was growing in my stomach, bile rising in my throat that I could taste inside my mouth. Matt, hey guys, you really missed out on a feast. Ice fishing is just as much fun in a blizzard, if not more. Let's reschedule the trip for next weekend, okay? I'll be waiting for you here. As much as we don't want to go, we've resolved that we have to. We can't leave Matt like that. We have to help him. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm. Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of Horror in Detail, the realm where the shadows whisper ancient secrets and nightmares come to life. I am your guide through the darkness, and on this channel, we delve into the spine-chilling world of Wendigo horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. First story. This story was shared by you/Romanian_roulette. My uncle encountered a thing on my granddad's ranch. I would like to note that this is my uncle's story, not mine. I will also be writing this through my uncle's perspective when the event occurred. Thanks, OP. I guess the whole event took place in the summer of '75. I was about 13. For the story to make sense, I'll start with context. My mother divorced my dad due to his issues with alcoholism, and quickly got custody over me and my 5 siblings. My dad was struggling greatly, so he made what was most likely the best decision, to move to a remote log cabin in Montana. He also had pretty serious mental problems. Because of his problems and the severity of them, my mom decided to never really let us stay at his cabin. She claims that she made a good decision, but I really feel like she accidentally made things worse, just isn't brave enough to own up to it. Anyway, my mother finally decided to let me fly up to my dad's cabin for a week, mostly because she felt like he needed someone in his life. Someone of his own flesh and blood to just be there for him. I wasn't very pleased with the decision at first, but my mother just told me to suck it up, so I did. The first day I arrived, my dad picked me up in his Ford 67 and we drove off. From the start, I could immediately tell that he was really bad off. He was very unkempt, he smelled like sweat and cheap deodorant, and he just gave off the vibe that he had practically hit rock bottom in life. But despite all that, I could tell he was happy to see me. For the rest of the day, we just took it easy, I helped him with some housework, and just got to know each other. Everything was calm as could be until the sun set. That night, as I tucked myself into bed, I heard a sound. It sounded like something scratching against the window, and I also remember a faint deep, guttural sound. It honestly scared the shit out of me. But I was never a brave kid, so I just pretended it wasn't there and fell asleep after a while. The next morning, I decided to tell my dad about what I heard, to which he replied, it was probably just some coyote or puma. I was pretty sure it wasn't a puma or coyote, but I went with it anyway. The next night, I heard the exact same thing I heard the night before, just louder. I tried to convince myself that it was just an animal, but deep down, I knew there was no way that the noise was from an animal, regardless of what it was. I begged my dad to let me sleep somewhere else, but he didn't seem to take me seriously. I guess he just thought I was joking or something. With my nerves practically screaming in fear, I tried to suck it up and sleep that night. But of course, it was back, and louder than ever. That's when I made the bold decision to look outside the window and hopefully, see that my concerns were over nothing. What I saw instead stuck with me permanently. I saw some humanoid creature on hands and knees, scratching at my window. Its body was thin and very lanky, and resembled a human with white skin aside from its head. Its head was the bloody skull of a buck. We even made eye-to-socket contact. I screamed and shut my eyes. I only opened them once I heard my dad running in from his room. When I opened my eyes, the creature was gone. Thankfully, my dad started to believe me from this point on. It's been about 40 years since the incident, and I still remember all of it like a nightmare you can never forget. My dad passed away 7 years later, apparently from a breaking and entering gone wrong. I don't think I want to know what they meant by gone wrong. Thankfully, my dad is in a better place now, and I just hope that one day, I'll forget what happened and I'll be at peace too. Second story. This story was shared by you/Groovy97. I saw something in the woods of Nova Scotia, Canada. I need to know what it was. This is a story I haven't really told anyone. Geez, if it weren't for my best friend being present when it happened, I probably would have gaslit myself into believing it was a nightmare or I was just going plain nuts. It's one of those memories that, no matter how much time goes by, you never forget. The details don't get muddy for even a moment. It was 2012, my freshman year of high school. I was 15 years old and had been in the company of my best friend that night. Let's call her Marie. We lived in a fairly small town on the eastern coast of Canada, Nova Scotia to be exact. It was an old mining community sat in the middle of the woods. To paint a picture for you, there wasn't really much to do. Our economy had tanked many moons before the rest of the country, so outside of hard drugs or crime all you really had to do was walk around. Marie and I just so happened to have made walking a bit of a natural pastime. We'd properly mapped out that entire town and its surrounding hills and forests in rain, shine, sleet or snow. We'd seen everything our little community had to offer, from its vast range of wildlife to its colorful selection of junkies. Please, keep these tidbits in mind before you tell me what we saw was an animal or a human. It was an autumn night, with nothing more for two high school girls to do and homework not being something we specialized in. We decided to go on one of our many town walks. This night in particular had us go a little off the beaten trail. You see, typically we'd have stuck to the main roads, probably ended up at a Tim Hortons before calling it a night and heading back home, but not tonight. Tonight we decided to walk by the food bank. You might be wondering what the draw of an old food bank is. You see, it wasn't just a food bank. Back when we were still a mining town, our food bank was a train station. Trains would come by and pick up coal that was freshly dug from the coal mines and take it all across the country. The old train yard was still there, its now rust-covered cars acting as mock tombs to a much more prosperous era gone by. We'd frequented the train yard with our friends in the past, climbing the cars, sneaking inside among other things that could have gotten kids hurt, so it wasn't a new place to us at all, and we thought that since it was at the tree line, tucked away in a quiet enough part of town that we could freely walk and chat without the concern of traffic or the like. Sidewalks weren't very frequent on that side of town. The sun had already set as we made our way down the long stretch of road, that October chill grasping at our small frames like glue, while the all-too-familiar autumn smell of still-dying plant life had permeated the air. We were talking to each other about what teenage girls typically babble about: boys, Facebook, you know, real important stuff. We had been so caught up in our conversation of the most dire importance that by the time we had made it to the fence that lined the train yard, it genuinely took us a moment to notice the noise. It was a very clear scream. We stopped dead in our tracks and began to stare at each other, not so much out of fear but bewilderment. It didn't quite sound like an animal, but it definitely didn't sound human either. I've gotten up close and personal with enough cougars, wolves, and toddlers to know that this screaming we were hearing was caught somewhere in between man and beast. We stood there, glaring into each other's eyes for a few more seconds before finally turning our attention towards the sound. It was dark, mind you, not pitch black, as there were some street lights around, though few and far between, but we couldn't see anything. To us from where we were standing it was just an old train station turned food bank, a rusted-out fence and a couple of unused and falling-apart train cars. The screams didn't subside as we were now staring into the foreground of what became a series of mental photographs of the area. It was then I realized that just up ahead, the third and final train car sat partially covered from our viewpoint by a few bushes. I had turned my head to Marie, a mischievous grin dawning my face like a cowl. "Last one to the train car has to buy the French vanillas," I exclaimed before quickly jogging along the side of the fence toward the final car. I heard Marie call out, "Hey! Wait up," as my feet clearly were acting before my brain. I mean, gosh, this could have been some wild animal or really anything, and I was just running into blind. I'm not particularly a brave person, and I'm honestly not sure why I did this or anything else that happens from here on out. I rounded the fence, the screaming getting louder and louder as I strode closer and closer. My heart began to race with both anxiety and sheer excitement. I wasn't sure what I was even getting myself into or what I was expecting to see at all. Needless to say, about a second later the ever-increasing beating from my chest had come to a standstill as my heart had made itself a new home in my throat. I stopped so quickly Marie had slammed right into the back of me, but I was so frozen in fear at what I was now looking at that I barely even budged, the screaming still echoing off of the forest so loudly I could barely hear the faint whisper of an "oh my God" escape Marie's lips. No more than about 20 feet away from us, crouched just under the train car, was a pale, hairless and naked person. It was just sitting there under the front of the car, screaming into the darkness of the autumn night. Each time it screamed its arms would leer forward from under the car, they extended out to an unnatural length almost like two tree branches. We both stood there, frozen in a mixture of fear and confusion. What were they doing? Were they hurt? On drugs? A million questions had begun to race through my head, and one look at Marie's face had told me the same questions were racking her mind as well. We must have stood there just watching in complete awe for what felt like 5 minutes, but realistically it couldn't have been more than a few seconds, maybe a minute at the most. That's when, in my infinite wisdom, I decided to take a few steps closer. I took my first shaky step towards it. I felt Marie's hand grasp my arm as if to say, "Don't," but it was clear that her fear outweighed her functionality as I easily broke from her grip just by continuing forward. I had closed about 5 or so feet of distance before stopping. I continued to stare at it from my position for another moment before clearing my throat and stammering the words, "Hey, are you okay?" The second I said those words, any thought of this being a person in need of help had flown out the window and dissipated in the cool nighttime air. Almost as if someone had hit stop on a recording, the screaming it had been happy to emit had ceased, and then it was staring at us. You need to understand, it didn't seem to even move its head. It was just 1 second staring forward into the night and the next right back toward us. A faint growl began to seep into the area now from where it was positioned as I took in the details of its face, in which I had become sure it wasn't human. It had a mouth that seemed to take up the width of most of its face, like a thin crack in a slab of concrete. Its eyes were small but almost glowed in through the darkness with the most piercing yellow I have ever seen. After it had taken its time to mimic our staring back at us, its crack-like mouth had almost cartoonishly curled into a smiling man-like grin, its lips parting to reveal its long, jagged and razor-like teeth. The beast and I continued locked into this war of attrition, though it was admittedly clearly more confident in being the dominant one in the exchange of looks. It broke the stare down after another moment, bringing its long, twiggy arms up from under the train car. It wrapped its fingers around the lip of the car and at a near breakneck speed kicked itself out from under the train car with a swing, almost like a chimpanzee leaping from one tree branch to another before landing and planting itself on the ground in a pose akin to that of a frog. It continued to its gaze, which now had begun to feel as though I was being sized up. My whole body had been shaking at what was akin to Mach 5. I tried to avert my eyes, look anywhere else, as it felt like any moment I would pass out in sheer terror, but I was drawn in. It felt almost like it had me in some sort of trance. I watched as it slowly began to stand, unfurling itself from the position it was in. It just seemed to get taller and taller until what I was looking at was at its full stance. Its entire body, a pasty gray. Its arms had drooped down well past its knees and its legs hooked in the back near the calf, almost like a goat. The words "I'm not religious in the slightest," though I was raised Catholic in my younger years, and the only words I could think to muster were, "Hail Mary, full of grace," as I began to pray and stared down what I was sure was my end. The creature then leered itself forward, throwing its arms back as its jaw unhinged itself from its skull and dropped down to about its collarbones as it let out one final shriek, the noise embedding itself in my brain and making sure not to ever leave, to forever haunt my nightmares along with the image. I closed my eyes so tight my head began to hurt. I could feel tears streaming down my cheeks with my lips pierced close so tightly that not even a breath could escape them, and then nothing. Silence. Deafening silence. Was it over? That quickly. Was I dead? I slowly opened one eye, peeking out. I saw it, a final look. It had retaken its crouching position, giving us its final glance as well before it turned its back to us. An encounter that had felt like it lasted hours had then swiftly ended in that of a few mere seconds as the creature leapt from its position to the tree line, and then one final leap into the woods. Just like that, it had vanished. I had almost all but forgotten Marie was there until the softness of her voice had brought me back to earth with a "Kenzie. What the fuck was?" I turned to her, her skin had gone sheet white and her eyes were red with tears. My legs had finally given out from the sheer exhaustion of it all as I had fallen to my knees, Marie quickly running over and catching me in an embrace as we silently wept. I'm not sure too much of what happened after that, it's all a blur really. I told some people at first, but they were quick to laugh me off as a liar or that I was simply being over-imaginative, with Marie moving away about a year later and my only witness having gone, that didn't help my credibility. It's been 10 years since then. I no longer live in Nova Scotia and actually live in the same town as my best Marie again. We still bring this up to each other every now and again but refrain from telling most anyone else out of fear of being labeled crazy. My last words I'd like to say are pretty blunt. If you live in Nova Scotia, Canada, please be careful. There is something living in the woods and it is not human. Third story. This story was shared by you/Fisherman Tales. The Man in the Woods. The cabin was small and hidden deep within the woods, far from any road. It had a wood shingle exterior, one door, one curtained window, and a metal stovepipe sticking out from the roof. Along the side was a rack of logs and a stump with an axe stuck in it. On the other side was a line for hanging clothes. Think it's abandoned? I whispered. Justin shook his head. Nature ain't taken it yet. What do you mean? You ain't ever noticed that when people leave a place, nature moves in? All those plants and green that show up. Oh, yeah. Like the old church. Just like that. And it don't take long, neither. Why does nature wait for people to leave? It don't wait, Cole. Nature's always trying to take over, but people won't let it. It's like a war, or an invasion, one that never ends. Nature was here first, though. So. That means we're the invaders. We ain't been given a choice. Well, we could at least be nicer. Justin was quiet for a moment, then said, let's get a closer look at that house. We crept through crunching leaves, stopping every few steps to listen, then continued forward until we reached the side of the house. What if they have a gun? I asked. Everyone has a gun out here. Yeah, but what if they use it on us? We're just kids. They ain't gonna shoot a couple of kids. People have killed kids before. You worry too much. If they pull a gun on us, we'll run. Ain't nobody faster than us. We ain't faster than bullets. Justin peeked around to the front of the cabin and said, I'm gonna try the door. Wait. Keep an eye out. Before I could say no, Justin rounded the corner and was at the door. I watched the surrounding woods for movement. With each passing second, I felt as if the homeowner was coming closer, but I was too anxious to tell if nothing was moving or if everything was. It was as if some invisible force were charging toward us. Cole, Justin whispered, startling me. He was peeking around the corner, waving me over. It's unlocked. I hurried to him, and we stepped through the open door into a small, tidy space. There was a neatly made twin-sized bed, and a deerskin rug spread across the wooden floor. On the right side of the room was a wood stove with a pot on top, with a shelf above it that held various jarred herbs and spices. On the left of the room was a bookshelf holding about a dozen books and next to that a wooden chest. Wow, I said. This is awesome. Let's see what's in that chest, Justin said, and knelt and opened it. He rummaged through, pulling out various clothes until it was empty. Nothing good. Check out these books, I said. Justin closed the chest, then looked over my shoulder as I pulled out books on gardening, hunting, bushcraft, and taxidermy. "What's this one?" Justin said, reaching past to grab a book with a blank leather cover. "Is it a Bible?" "It's my journal," a deep voice announced from behind us, startling us against the bookshelf, causing several books to get knocked over onto the floor. The man was tall and looked to be in his mid-40s. He was clean-shaven and didn't look much like the sort of person you'd expect to find living hidden in the woods. "Sorry," Justin said and held out the journal, and as he did so, a photograph of a young boy fell out. The man reached down and picked it up, looked at it for a moment, then took the journal from Justin and placed the photo inside. "My son," the man said. He stepped toward us, and we moved out of the way as he placed the journal back onto the shelf, then knelt to pick up the rest of the books. "Sorry, sir," I said, and helped him pick up the books. Justin did the same, then the man took the books from us and returned them to their shelves. "What are your names?" the man asked. We introduced ourselves, and he told us his name was Henry, then asked, "Is this the first time you've seen my cabin?" "Yes, sir," we answered. "Nobody else knows about it?" Justin and I looked at each other, then back at Henry, and shrugged. "We ain't ever heard anyone mention it," Justin said. Henry looked at us a moment, then nodded. "Okay. Don't tell anyone." He walked over to a bucket of water he must have brought inside with him and dumped some of it into the pot that sat atop the stove. Then he stepped outside. "We should go," I whispered. "Okay," Justin answered. We hurried to the doorway, and right as we reached it, Henry was there holding a rifle and a log. He looked at us a moment, then we moved out of the way, so he could pass. He stepped through and leaned the rifle against the wall and placed the log into the stove. "I'm going to make rabbit stew," he said, and began to make a fire. "You're welcome to join." "We need to get back home," I said. Justin hesitated, though, and asked, "Why you out here?" With the fire going, the man shut the hatch, and stood and faced us. "Because I want to be." "Are you alone?" The man nodded. "What about your son?" I asked. The man looked at me, then his eyes fell to his feet, and he said, "He's dead." "Oh. Sorry. How'd he die?" Justin asked. The man looked back up. "He was sick." "Where's his mom?" The man shrugged. "I don't know. We aren't together anymore." The water was beginning to boil. The man turned to it and began putting in different herbs and spices. "Will one of you grab the rabbit from the stump outside?" he asked. Justin stepped outside and Henry glanced over at me, and said, "Go grab some vegetables from the garden out back." "Which ones?" "Whichever ones you like." Justin and I met on my way to the garden, and he said, "He doesn't seem so bad." "I don't know. What if he's some sort of outlaw?" Justin grinned. "Maybe he's a bank robber. Or a murderer." Justin held up the skinned rabbit. "This one might agree with you," then he laughed and headed into the cabin. At the garden, I hadn't the faintest idea what I was looking at. Everything looked like weeds, aside from the tomatoes and peppers. So, that's what I grabbed. "Here you go," I said as I stepped back inside, and handed Henry the veggies. "No potatoes or carrots?" he asked. "I didn't see any. They're under the soil." "Oh." Henry smirked and took the tomatoes and peppers from me, and said, "Well, let's see how Cole's stew turns out." That evening, we sat around the cabin and ate the spiciest rabbit stew I'd ever had. For a second there, I'd even thought we'd been poisoned. But Henry just laughed and said I'd picked something called a habanero pepper. "What kind of psycho eats this stuff?" Justin said as he gulped down a second cup of water. "Sorry, boys," Henry laughed. "I should have warned you." He stood and grabbed another jar and said, "Try this. It might help cool you off." "What is it?" I asked. Honey. I was desperate, so I quickly took the jar and stuck a spoonful in my mouth, and sure enough, it seemed to help. Justin snagged it from me and did the same, and before long, we'd cleaned out that entire jar of honey. Look at y'all, a couple of Pooh Bears, Henry joked. Sorry, I apologized. I'll get you more. I appreciate that, Cole. Henry stood and took our dishes from us. It's getting dark. You boys better head home. We agreed and thanked him for the honey, and I apologized for ruining the rabbit stew. Henry shrugged and said, I liked it. Might make more for myself sometime. That next morning, I was up in my room when I heard a commotion coming from across the street. Justin and his dad were shouting at each other, and shortly thereafter, Justin came storming outside. I quickly opened my window and hollered for him, and he looked up at me and said, Let's get the hell out of here, Cole. I put on my shoes and hurried down the stairs and past my mom and sister, who were sitting on the couch watching the morning show. Where you off to? Mom asked. Gonna go hang out with Justin. Be home before dark this time. I will. I mean it. Justin was waiting for me outside. We bumped fists, and he said, Let's go see what Henry's doing. Right now? You got anything better to do? I shrugged. No, I guess not. Hold on a second. I hurried back inside and into the kitchen and grabbed one of those bottles of honey that's shaped like a bear, then ran out the door again as my mom said, Hey, were you taking my honey? I looked at Justin and yelled, Run, and we took off for the woods. As we walked through the woods, Justin went on about what an asshole his dad was and how life would be better if it were just him and his mom. I wasn't so sure if it would be better or just another kind of awful, considering his mom was a useless alcoholic. But, at least she didn't hit him. She wasn't always a drunk, you know. Justin said. That's why I wear this necklace. It was a shark tooth necklace I'd never seen Justin without for as long as I knew him. Nothing impressive. You can find one in any beach gift shop. They weren't together for a while, my mom and dad, Justin continued. They'd broken up. Before you knew me. Mom and I were happy back then. We went to the beach one day, and she bought me this. We couldn't afford much, you know. But we didn't need much. Or at least I didn't think so. Why'd they get back together? Mom thought we needed more, and Dad could afford it. He's the only reason we're in that house. I guess that ain't all bad. We wouldn't be friends if you weren't in that house. Justin smiled and patted me on the back. You're right, Cole. But never knowing someone is okay. Losing someone you knew is what's hard. Henry was sitting in the doorway reading a book when we arrived. Back so soon. Brought you some honey, I said. Henry held out his hand and I tossed it to him. He looked at it and smiled. Thank you, Cole. What you readin'? Justin asked. The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. Ever heard of it? Justin shook his head. I'm not much of a reader. Henry looked at me and I shook my head as well. What's it about? I asked. It's about two friends, Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. They get into a bunch of trouble and go on adventures and such. It's sort of a kid's book. Henry closed the book. I started reading it again because you two remind me of the main characters. Cole, you're like Tom, and Justin here is like Huckleberry. What kind of name is Huckleberry? Justin asked. Henry shrugged. Same could be said about Justin, or Cole, or even Henry. What kind of name is any name, really? We hadn't a clue, and noticing he'd confused us, Henry laughed and said, So, what can I do for you boys today? I guess we're just looking for something to do. Henry put the book down and scratched at his chin. Y'all know how to chop logs? On that day, Henry taught us how to chop logs and start a fire, and over the next couple of years we'd sneak off a few days each week and bring Henry food and supplies in exchange for lessons in self-sufficiency. He taught us things like how to work with wood, garden, hunt, skin an animal, and cook. We'd also check out books for him from the library, and when he finished one we'd spend the following night sitting fireside as he told us all about what he'd read. Henry became like a father to Justin and me, and that made me and Justin feel more like brothers. Justin was 16 when he told me his plan. "I want to introduce Henry to my mom." "What? Why?" I asked. "Maybe they'll hit it off." "But your parents are still married." "I know. I'm hoping if Mom meets Henry, she'll fall in love with him and leave my dad." "You don't even know if Henry is her type." "How can he not be? He's single and nice and way better than my dad." "That don't mean she'll fall in love with him." "It don't work that way, Justin. You even said that the only reason your mom got back together with your dad is because he had money." "Henry doesn't have any money." Justin thumbed at the shark tooth necklace. "Henry can show her that we don't need money to be happy. He can help her remember." Part of me didn't want it to happen because I wanted Henry to be my dad. I would have been jealous. But I also knew that Henry wasn't just living in the woods. He was hiding. For whatever reason, he didn't want to be found. That night there was an argument across the street. It was violent and it was loud. Glass was shattered and doors were slammed, and in the morning, Justin was gone. I'd gotten used to hearing from Justin every day. If I didn't see him, he'd call me over the walkie-talkie. This was the 90s. We weren't using cell phones. So, I went to his house that following afternoon and knocked on the door. Something I was always hesitant to do. His dad answered and just looked at me. "Is Justin home?" I asked. "No. I haven't seen him all day." His dad shrugged. "Not my problem. But he's your son." "Excuse me?" I swallowed and said, "Sorry, I meant that you'd know better than anyone else." "Well, I don't." Before he shut the door, I noticed that the rug that was usually spread across the living room floor was gone, and there was a new hole in the wall about the size of a fist. That had me concerned, but I decided I'd check with Henry before telling my mom what I saw. So, I made the long walk through the woods alone to Henry's house. White smoke was billowing from the chimney as I arrived and knocked on the door. Henry opened it and said, "Hey, Cole. Come on in." I stepped inside and could smell that he was cooking a stew. "I'm sorry to disappoint you, but you're probably not going to want any of this stew," he said. "How come?" He lifted the pot off the stove and showed me. "It's your spicy rabbit concoction." I smirked. "No thanks." "Well, if you change your mind, I have plenty of honey." Henry went back to stirring. "Where's Justin?" "I was hoping he was here." Henry stopped stirring and looked at me. "You can't find him?" "No. I haven't seen him all day." "That's not like him." "No, it ain't. But I heard his dad hollerin' last night, and when I went to his house a couple hours ago, there was a big hole in the wall and the living room rug was missin'. And his dad said he ain't seen him all day." Henry sighed and sat on the bed. "Have you told your mom?" "Not yet. I wanted to see if he was here first." "Can you think of anywhere else he might be?" I shrugged. "No. He was planning on coming out here anyway." "Without you?" "I don't know. Maybe. He wanted to try to get you to meet his mom." Henry furrowed his brow. "Why?" "He thought if she met you, she might fall in love and leave his dad." Henry smirked and shook his head. "Oh, Justin. That poor boy." I watched Henry for a moment, then asked, "Would you have married his mom?" "No, Cole. I don't know her, and even if I did, my marrying days are over. This is how I'm going to live until I die." Alone? Henry nodded. What do I do now? Henry stood up and took the pot off the stove, set it onto a cinder block, and tasted the stew. If you tell the police and Justin becomes a missing person, there will be search parties looking all up and down these woods. They'll find me. So, finding Justin is more important. I'm a wanted man, Cole. It was the first time I'd heard him admit it. He truly was an outlaw. What did you do? I asked. Henry put the spoon down and walked over to the bookshelf, pulled out his journal and removed the picture of the young boy and looked at it. His name was Sean. Your son. I lied when I told you he was sick. He wasn't sick. He was murdered. A man took him when he was walking home from school. He took my son, locked him in a cellar, and tortured him until he died. Sean was only 10 years old. I'm sorry, Henry. I knew who did it, but the police thought differently. They said there wasn't enough evidence. But I knew without a shadow of a doubt, it was him. So, I did what the police couldn't. I killed him. Henry turned and looked at me. And, for that reason, I can't let them find me. I was shocked that Henry was even capable of such a thing. Okay. Then what do I do? Henry placed the photograph on the bookshelf and sat back on the bed. You need to either find Justin or find proof that his dad killed him. But you need to move quick, before someone files a missing person report. Justin's dad owned a contracting business. Some days he worked long hours, some days he barely worked at all. It was impossible to gauge when he would and wouldn't be home. So, the following morning I watched by my window until he left, and the second he did, I hurried across the street. The door was locked, as I figured it would be, but I knew the same couldn't be said about Justin's bedroom window. There'd been plenty of times when Justin snuck out that window in the middle of the night and, likewise, I'd also snuck in a handful of times. The latch was broken. It was easy. I entered as quiet and careful as I could, and looked around Justin's room for any clues. It was messier than I remembered, and the door had been knocked off its hinges. But what stood out most to me was that his mattress was missing. Nothing else seemed out of place. I stepped into the hall and crept carefully toward the living room, keeping an eye out for Justin's mom as I went. The first thing I noticed was that the walls had more than one hole punched into them and the furniture was all scattered about. It looked like Justin's dad had gotten into a fistfight with the room itself. Again, I noticed the missing rug, and knelt and smelled something like bleach, and as I looked even closer, saw what looked like 3 drops of blood. All the clues were pointing to the worst. I crept over to the kitchen and opened the fridge. Lots of beer. I closed it and looked at the counters. There was a knife missing from the wooden knife block. I was almost certain now, but I had to check 2 more spots, the garage and the master bedroom. The garage had a freezer, and my heart trembled at the thought of what I might find in it. First, I looked around behind tool chests and whatnot, and finding nothing, I walked over to the freezer. Please don't be in here, I whispered to myself, then lifted the lid. There wasn't anything inside but deer meat and ice cream. I sighed with relief. Then, all of a sudden, the garage door began to open. Without a second thought, I hurried back into the house and didn't get far before I was face to face with Justin's mom. She blinked at me a few times, then groggily said, "Hey, Cole. Where's Justin?" At that moment, the interior garage door opened and Justin's dad stepped inside. "What the hell are you doing here?" he said. "I'm looking for Justin. He's not here." "I told you that already." "Where is he?" "I don't know." "Yes, you do." His dad's eyes got big, and he said, "What are you trying to say?" "You killed him." "I know you did." "Boy, you better watch your mouth." "What's he talking about, Chris?" Justin's mom asked. "Shut the fuck up, woman." I backed up toward Justin's mom and said, "He killed Justin." And if you don't leave here, he's going to kill you, too. Chris pointed his finger at me and stepped closer. I'll kill you, boy. That's who I'll kill if you don't get out of my house right now. Chris charged at me and Justin's mom pushed me out of the way and screamed, "Get out of here, Cole." Then she pulled at Chris long enough for me to run out the front door, and whether that was enough, I don't know, because I just kept running without looking back until I reached the woods, and even then, I still hurried until I got to Henry's cabin. I didn't bother to knock on the door this time. And when I got inside, Henry wasn't there. It was quiet and everything was tidy. I sat on the bed and caught my breath, and noticed that the rifle was gone. He must have been out hunting. I sat there a moment, waiting for him, and noticed the photograph of his son still sitting on the bookshelf from the previous night. It seemed dear to him, not something he liked to share. But, I was curious, so I picked it up and got my first real look at the boy. He looked to be about 10, the age Henry said he was when he died. He didn't look much like Henry. He was blonde-haired and blue-eyed, whereas Henry had dark features. There was something about his smile that seemed forced. His eyes didn't look happy. In fact, he looked kind of scared. But, there was something else. Something in the background that was out of place. It was Henry's cabin. That didn't make sense. Henry moved to the woods to escape the law, a law he didn't break until after his son died. How could his son have been here? I dropped the picture and pulled Henry's journal from the shelf and opened it. It wasn't a journal at all. It was a photo album. Each page a photo of a different child. I felt the room start to spin. I had to leave before he came back. I turned around to go out the door and stopped. There he was, standing right in front of me. "Hi, Cole," he said. He looked at the book in my hand. "I see you looked at my journal." I didn't look at it. "No." "Oh, well, then let me show you." "That's okay. I've gotta go." "Nonsense." Henry shut the door. "Stay a little while." Then he tapped the bed with the butt of his rifle and said, "Have a seat." Reluctantly, I set the book down and did as he asked. He stepped over to the bookshelf and picked up his journal, then sat next to me on the bed. He carefully opened it to the first page. "This is my collection, Cole. They're in ascending order by age. Page 1, you can see, is an infant. Little baby Andy. Page 2 is 1-year-old Tessa." He flipped the page. 2-year-old Abigail, or Abby, as her parents liked to call her. "Please, I don't want to see any more." Henry sighed and flipped a few pages to age 9, and next to it was a blank space. He placed the photo of the blonde-haired boy under age 10. Michael had gotten lost in the woods. He found me. Just like you and Justin. "Where is he?" "Justin? Oh, let me show you." Henry flipped past ages 11 through 15 and stopped on 16. It was a picture of Justin bound to a chair in a dark room. He was a fighter, I have to admit. I felt sick. Tears started to swell in my eyes. Justin had been betrayed by the man he trusted most, and at that moment I had not only lost my best friend, my brother, but I'd also lost another father. Now, Cole. Don't cry. I'll let you see him. You can say goodbye. He's alive. Henry pointed at the floor. He's down there. Show me. Henry closed the book and stood, then lifted the deerskin rug, revealing a hatch door. He opened it and a rotten odor lifted into the cabin. He motioned with his hand to the dark hole in the floor and said, "After you." I stood and looked down into the hole. I don't see anything. Henry reached under his bed and grabbed a flashlight and handed it to me. I shined it down the hole and could see a ladder descending about 20 feet to a dirt floor. "You go first," I said. Henry frowned. "Cole, whether you go down or not, I'm the one controlling this situation." I choose whether you live or die. I stared at him a moment, knowing what he said was true, and leaned over the hole and yelled, "Justin." No answer. Why isn't he answering? Henry shrugged. Maybe he can't hear you. I couldn't take not knowing any more, so I stepped to the ladder and descended. To my surprise, Henry followed. "Justin, you in here?" My feet touched the dirt floor and I looked around the room with the flashlight. It was empty of all except a chair in the middle, and slumped over in the chair was Justin. I hurried over to him and lifted his head, and when I did, it fell back, and I could see that his throat had been cut, and the ground beneath him was sodden with blood. "Sorry, Cole. I needed 16. He trusted you. And were those 2 years not some of his best?" I looked at Justin's lifeless body, the shark tooth necklace, his symbol of hope, still hanging from his neck. "Are you going to kill me next?" "Well, I already have a 14. Henry opened the journal and took out the picture and looked at it for a moment. Then he tore it in half and said, "But it looks like I need a new one." He dropped the journal and rushed toward me, and right before he reached me, I yanked the necklace from Justin's neck and stabbed the shark tooth straight into Henry's eye. "Fuck!" he cried, covering his face, blood seeping between his fingers. I sprinted past him and up the ladder, and before I got to the top, he grabbed a hold of my ankle. I kicked several times and managed to connect with his bloodied face, knocking him to the ground. Then I heaved myself up from the hole, slammed the hatch shut and piled everything I could on top of it. I watched for a moment as he tried and failed to push through, then I grabbed his rifle and took off for my house. The cabin was so far back in the woods that the police asked me to take them to it. My mom went with me, and around noon, we reached it. We stayed back as the police moved forward with guns drawn. But, as they entered the cabin, I could see that the hatch was now open. They never found Henry. He left behind everything except his journal. I recently went back to the old neighborhood. Most of the houses have been sitting empty for over 20 years. I suppose people weren't comfortable with the idea that Henry might still be in those woods. And, now that everyone is gone, nature has moved into all of their homes. All except for one. Justin's dad stayed. But, not his mom. On the day of Justin's funeral, I gave her a gift. A necklace. One which reminded her of a happier time. In the woods is a spot where the cabin once stood. In its place a cross memorializing where so many children lost their lives. Nobody knows for sure how many children died there. At least 6, as that's how many bodies were found buried in various spots around the cabin. Around the cross are several mementos placed there by loved ones, a toy car, a girl's hair ribbon, a teddy bear. But, on the day I visited, I found something that sent a chill down my spine. A copy of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. Inside was a handwritten message, which read, "See you soon, 38. Tomorrow will be my 38th birthday." Fourth story. This story was shared by you/comprehensive N6058. I saw something terrifying while hiking in rural Appalachia. For context, I am a professional wilderness explorer. Since I was young, my passion had been geared towards the wilderness. I have hiked on rough terrain in many countries. I know the wilderness like it was my own precious child. I research what specific wildlife lives in the area before I go hiking, so I know what to be prepared for. That's what makes this ordeal even more terrifying. One day, while browsing through a travel site for West Virginia, I saw a pop-up for a specific mountain trail. Again, nothing seemed out of the ordinary while researching, and it really seemed like the ideal hiking spot, leading up to a beautiful view showing a gorgeous blue lake. When researching the trail, it was mentioned that the area was very isolated, with the nearest town being 123 miles away. It seemed very enticing. Of course, it had to normal flora and fauna of the region, and it didn't seem odd. It did mention not to disturb the wildlife and to watch where you step because of many false footholds. That would break away and cause you to fall down the cliffside. Overall, it's just the normal mountain trail. I spent about a month preparing for this trip. I made sure to contact everyone I knew so they would know where I was in case I went missing. I then drove there and started my hike. Once I got there, I relished at the beauty of it all. The start of the trail had a view of many peaks staring down at you, and I thought to myself how the view looked like giant gods, towering over the world. I then started on the trail. At first, everything was fine. It was your typical mountain trail. I made sure I took a break every 15 minutes or so I didn't overwork myself and have to call quits. It was around my 5th break that things started to seem off. The birds had stopped singing, and I couldn't hear the chattering of insects. I didn't even hear the wind blowing through the trees. It was as if everything had vanished. After about 5 minutes, I started on the hike again. I was a little nervous and on edge, though, because I was the loudest thing there. It felt wrong, as though I was being watched, stared down by some malevolent force, playing with me. I continued, until around break number 20. I stopped, getting out my bottle of water, as I had done multiple times before. But as I was putting the bottle to my lips, I realized something was off. I heard twigs snapping, about 10 feet behind me. I threw my water bottle down and turned around to see what I heard. I can't describe exactly what I saw. That is a bit too difficult. The creature I saw was vaguely humanoid, bipedal, with pale, paste-like skin. Its face, though, was certainly not. It had eyes that I can only describe as being too big to fit its face. Its face, though small, still surrounded the eyes, but I swear its eyes were too big. The creature's mouth was indescribable, but I think the closest I could use for you to picture it would be to say that it was somewhere in between a human and a dog mouth, with 5 layers of knife-like teeth. Its hands were freakishly large, about the size of my arm, with long skinny fingers to match. About the rest of it, I can't really describe. It was a sort of blur, almost hard to see. That's all I remember about its lower half. I stood still, staring at the thing. It hadn't noticed me yet, but it wouldn't be long before it did. It was then that I started to sneeze, and then the creature really noticed me. It turned its head around, but instead of attacking me, it spoke. "Onigie," it said, in a deep guttural voice. "I don't understand," I said, confused, startled by its speaking. It looked at me, pushed its head forward, as if to say, "Leave." I then started to run, leaving in fear. I made sure it didn't follow, and I ran till I got to my cat. I recently tried to do research, but I haven't found anything on it. But what I do know is that it spoke in Cherokee. It told me to leave. I have researched the region and have seen that many people have come up missing there. I now think about the human-like sorrow in that creature's eyes, and I think I know why it wanted me to leave. 5th story. This story was shared by you/Phoenix_flies. I witnessed a horrific ritual in the woods. A stone circle sits in the ancient oak woods behind my house. A dozen large rocks, positioned in a pattern that could be no accident. One is carved into a sort of throne. One sits upon 2 others to form an arch, echoing the formations at Stonehenge, a mere hour's drive away. I used to play there with my older brother, until he was tragically taken from us. Perhaps too young to fully comprehend his loss, I returned to the stone circle daily, playing with my imaginary friend in his stead. Doghead was the name I gave him, inspired by a rather obvious feature my young imagination had conjured up. In my mind's eye, he had the energy and affection of a puppy, and he was as close a companion as a lonely young boy could ever hope for. We used to play for hours, safe in the knowledge that home was the only house for miles. My parents were distant and self-absorbed throughout my childhood, and the loss of their eldest son, their golden boy, only turned them colder. They were whisked away to join him by a devastating car accident when I was 19. The house, the surrounding land, and the stone circle in the woods, it was suddenly all mine. It was finally as empty as it had always felt. Those first few years were strange. I had been relatively self-sufficient for as long as I could remember, so my day-to-day life changed little after they died. I worked the same job, writing copy for websites and magazines from home. I ate the same food, groceries delivered weekly. It took a long time to get used to living without their influence, without their perpetual misery. As time went by, I became more comfortable in my own skin. I left behind the cowering, appeasing child. I shrugged off the expectations and the aura of constant disappointment. I started learning who I was, and I grew to like it. And I forgot about the stone circle in the woods behind the house. The forest itself is sparse. Each wizened oak tree stands at a respectful distance from the others, as if honoring some ancient acorn pact. Their high canopies dominate the sky, permitting precious little sunlight to filter through their leaves. Below, the prime soil was claimed by their web of roots long ago, leaving few resources for competing flora. The only bushes daring enough to challenge the monopoly of these giants are holly and gorse, their sharp leaves offering refuge to songbirds and scavengers alike. Sparse though these woods are, they are far from lifeless. At night, however, the woods don a deathly disguise. Save for the eerie breeze shuffle of the leafy canopy, an unnatural stillness hangs between the trunks like a thick fog. The distance between each oak lends a feeling of being exposed to all directions, carrying light further than might be expected, which is how I was first enticed by the glimmers I saw from my bathroom window. Half asleep and wishing to be fully so, I had neglected to turn on the bathroom light. If I had so much as flipped that switch, the subtle flickering outside would have gone unnoticed, the horrors of the night now seared into my mind would have gone without witness, and I would soon have fallen asleep safe and untroubled. Instead, I slapped myself awake and threw together a dark outfit, pocketing a torch. In an instant I was 12 years old again, preparing for an imaginary stealth mission, sneaking out under the cover of darkness, taking care not to step on even a single twig, partly in commitment to the scene, and partly from fear of the retribution from my parents should I be caught. Both then and now, the fear mixed with excitement to produce the most irresistible cocktail, and I crept into the woods without hesitation. I advanced steadily as my eyes adjusted to the gloom. Every step was measured, every motion a calculated risk. Roots could be trip hazards. The snap of dry branches could give me away. A dirt hole from badger or fox habitation could spell a sprained ankle or worse. I kept my breathing deep and steady, preparing to run at a moment's notice. Peering around trunks as I pressed into the woods, I followed the light while keeping to the shadows. As it drew me on, I realized it must originate from more than a single source. I pictured a forest fire, but there was no smell of smoke, no crackle of caught bark. A bizarre sound made me stop dead, pressing my back against the nearest tree. It was deep, guttural, and reminded me of videos I'd seen of Mongolian throat singing. The low vocal rumble rolled through the forest, several voices combined into a loud and stirring chord which I felt take a firm hold of my ribcage. As suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. I listened intently for any other sound and could faintly hear a single voice, monotone and slow, but I couldn't make out the syllables. I peeked cautiously around the oak, and began deeper into the woods. It wasn't long until I saw the source of the light, dozens and dozens of blazing torches, easily 100 or more, each mounted on a stake driven into the ground at an angle, the flames directed outwards as if to ward off the forest itself. The torches formed a wide circle in a clearing, within which stood a host of robed figures, heads lowered. Each crimson robe was uniformly embellished with gold borders and detailing, mirroring the flames that danced around them. I saw the torches first, then the people. Then I saw the stones, and my breath caught in my throat. The gathering had taken place on the ancient playground of my youth, within the stone circle I had long since forgotten. Far from respectful occupiers, however, 4 of these cloaked intruders were painting symbols and sigils onto the bare, pure rocks, a bucket of red in one hand and a paintbrush in the other. A network of circles, curves and crossed lines already adorned most of the rocks, they were nearly finished with their task. I watched them corrupting my childhood one brush stroke at a time, and fought hard not to yell. This felt like both a deeply personal attack and a sacrilegious transgression all at once. I wept in silence as I watched them complete their work. I was struck by a vivid memory of my brother sat in the chair carved stone, bending to tap a stick onto each of my shoulders in turn. He was king that day, and I was being knighted to protect the realm. For hours, he would point out imaginary invaders and threats to the kingdom, all trying to break into the sacred space of the stone circle, and I would charge into battle, bellowing as best a boy of 7 could, swinging a branch to fend off foes on all sides. I chided my childish stupidity. When outnumbered, as I was last night, self-preservation comes first. Bravado without caution would be suicide. One of these interlopers was standing on my brother's throne, arms outstretched, addressing the others like a priest leading a congregation. His was the voice I had heard, though too quiet to discern from where I stood. I had to get closer. The group was focused on his speech, I reasoned, and any subtle motion I made in the shadows of the forest would likely be lost among the flickering torches. Light on my feet, I pressed even closer, crouching to take cover beneath the spikes of a holly bush with an oak to my side. I was mere feet from the edge of the clearing, but confident in my concealed position. No further, I told myself, either remain, or retreat. I was close enough to hear the speech, but its meaning was lost to me. It clearly wasn't English, but sounded like no language I had ever heard. There was a guttural, stern tone to it, almost Germanic, but the syllables weren't recognizably German either. Percussive sounds punctuated the phrases, sometimes a click, sometimes a hacking noise like the speaker was clearing his throat. The structure of the speech was alien to me, and although I couldn't hope to comprehend its meaning, I was enraptured. It felt as if he was speaking from beyond himself, from somewhere far older than any tongues remembered or recorded, channeling verses written before writing. The crowd was similarly captivated, hanging from his every utterance. All except the 4 painters, and one man in the middle. This man, I saw, was unrobed. Rather, he was naked and kneeling, his wrists bound behind his back, eyes wide with impassioned pleading as the priest figure continued. His head was shaking back and forth, as if to deny every utterance of the speech. The scene put me in mind of a trial, perhaps for some pagan or shamanic cult. I know little of such beliefs and values, having led such an insular life, so I had no real frame of reference, but the whole display felt sinister and sickened me. It came again, the sound which had shocked me earlier, that low, rumbling chord, now revealed to originate from the throats of the entire congregation acting as one, triggered by something the throned figure had said. He sliced a hand through the air and the tone ceased immediately. Another hand gesture and it began afresh, a slice and it stopped. This on and off routine repeated, its conductor picking up the pace steadily from labored to frenzied. The bound man was clearly terrified, his pleading eyes darting from figure to figure, each swept up in this guttural chanting crescendo. Dark red streaks painted his face, from his eyes down to his chin. With a final swipe of the priest's arm, the group fell silent. A beckon of his hand, and 2 of the hooded flock hauled the bound man to his feet, dragging him towards the stone chair. I could hear him straining and groaning through closed lips. As he was brought before the priest, I saw his mouth had been sewn shut with a tight web of cord, his lips turned inwards. Those red tear streaks he wore were colored by dried blood, his wide eyes unable to close without their lids. This group, or cult, had taken morbid steps to prevent him from screaming or looking away. The leader of the ceremony drew a short dagger, holding it skywards, flames glinting off the blade. The man protested as best he could, but was flanked and held in place by taller, stronger figures. In 2 quick motions an X was traced across his bare chest, the wounds shallow and scarlet bright. The crowd shifted suddenly at this, surging towards the throne. Hands were all over the man in an instant, carrying him back and away, ignoring his feeble writhing and muffled screams. A divide had formed in the clearing, bisecting the stone circle. On one side, the cult, some of whom had picked up torches and were brandishing them. On the other side, the man, kicked to the floor and struggling to stand with his hands still bound. Flames were turned on him, keeping him at bay from the group. Behind him, the stone archway loomed, a gateway to the gloom of the woods. A gap had been deliberately left in the circle of torchlight. The leader bellowed out a three-syllable chant in that strange language, which was eagerly echoed back by his flock. He repeated the phrase, louder, rousing the crowd. This back-and-forth exchange continued, building in volume and speed towards a raw cacophony. When there was scarce a pause between call and response, the priest handed the reins to chaos, the clamor of the crowd drowning the forest in a tide of sound. Feet were stomping, arms were waved. Frenzied dances broke out. One member of the congregation passed out. They were unceremoniously rolled to the side of the circle and abandoned in favor of the growing noise. I lay flat under the holly bush with my hands clamped over my ears, such was the sheer volume before me. As painful as the sound was to bear, I couldn't help but find their primal passion compelling. I should have left them to their devices. I should have made a break for home while they were so deeply distracted. They stopped, as one, falling completely silent. The sense of euphoric elation had collapsed, giving way to a nervous foreboding. Heads turned anxiously from side to side. The group huddled, gathering in closer towards the stone chair. The bound man was making his way towards them on his knees, straining to force pleas through stitched lips, but was kept back by the torchbearers. They seemed intent on pushing him towards the archway, towards the looming dark of the forest. Someone in the crowd noticed something in the forest behind the bound man, pointing a finger beyond the circle, past the stone arch, into the tree-line. Their extended arm was quickly pulled down by other hands, as if chided by the group. Regardless, a tangible excitement overtook the gathering. Murmurs broke out, whispers and gasps. They pressed back, even further away from the bound man and the stone archway behind him. I strained my eyes to see beyond the flames, seeing nothing but shifting shadows. As I looked back to the crowd, however, I saw it. A tall figure emerged from the trees, its outline only clear from the corner of my eyes as they struggled to adjust to the dark. It appeared as though the shadow of a tree had come to life, standing at least 8 or 9 feet tall. I couldn't see where its height ended. It swept stiffly towards the clearing as if carried by invisible ropes. There was no motion of walking, this giant shadow floated. It stopped at the edge of the clearing, where it should have been bathed in torchlight. Instead, it was a void, a vertical black hole, seeming to drain the light from the woods around it. As I tried to make sense of what I was witnessing, this floating shadow was passed by a second. They moved alternately. One stopped as the other advanced, carried in sweeping motions. As they drew nearer to the stone circle, the bound man turned his begging towards them, throwing himself down, his blood-stained face against the thin grass, his frame racked with wretched sobs. He was hoping, or praying, for mercy. None came. Without warning, his torso was wrapped in giant fingers of that same vacant darkness. He was snatched through the archway in barely a breath, out towards the tree-line, and lifted high over the stones. His legs kicked at the air, finding no purchase. As he was held aloft, I gleaned a sense of the scale of the creature before me. It was, I now saw, a single entity. What I had identified as 2 figures earlier were merely its shins. It stood on 2 legs, looming over the stone circle, one huge hand resting atop the archway. Light failed to adhere to its form, offering only a silhouette to interpret against the backdrop of torchlit oaks. It had moved in complete silence, despite its size. Though vast, it seemed to share the limbs and proportions of a human, with one notable exception. I felt my heart stop dead as I looked up into the canopy of leaves, and recognized the outline of a forgotten figure from my own past, looming over the stone circle in which we had played so long ago. I clamped my hands over my mouth to keep the shock within. I had grown a lot over the past 20 years, inside and out. It seemed that Doghead had grown even more. The cultists had by now dropped to their knees, every head bowed in silent reverence. A uniform stillness had come over them, likely born from both respect and fear, and they had good reason for the latter. The naked man, their sacrifice, was held aloft by Doghead with both hands, those massive pitch-black fingers clasped around his legs and his torso. He strained to scream as the creature tightened its grip and twisted. Something gave out with a crunch, his ribcage and pelvis rotating in different directions. Blood spewed from his mouth as his lips parted in spite of the stitches, bellowing his pain freely now through torn curtains of scarlet. As his body bent, his skin broke around his midriff, yellow fat parting to give way to a cascade of entrails. He was divided, his scream failing as his diaphragm dropped. Doghead was elated, raising the drooping organs above its head, opening its enormous jaws and directing the offal inside. Even while consuming its prey, no sound came from the shadow monster itself. The man was just barely clinging on to life, gasping breathlessly, his eyes darting around in panic as dark teeth the size of his forearm clamped down on what remained of his torso, gnawing like living jerky. Fighting to divert my gaze from this atrocity, I looked towards the lowered heads of the cult, and saw more shoulders shaking than still. They were deeply afraid, that much was clear. Even the throned figure who had led the ritual was kneeling on the stone seat, head bowed and trembling. A sudden gasp erupted from the crowd. The cultist who had passed out earlier had awoken and was looking around, bleary and sluggish. Some members of the group had noticed and were trying to encourage them to their knees, but they were resistant in their barely conscious state. Doghead dropped its snack, staring fiercely as this poor fool staggered to their feet. The creature's eyes were previously indistinguishable from the great canine shadow of its head, but now they shone a piercing white, small and blazing. This accidental indignity from the dazed cultist had changed something in Doghead. Swiftly but silently it swept an arm towards the ground, extinguishing a dozen of the protective torches around the stone circle with a single motion. There was a brief moment of profound quiet, as those gathered seemed to process what had just happened. The quenched torches breathed the last of their smoke. A second of foreboding stillness hung heavy in the night air, and then, pandemonium. The crowd fell about themselves, shrieking in terror, scrambling over one another in all directions, eschewing reverence for pure panic. Doghead didn't hesitate, lunging into the stone circle, no longer held back. It was absolutely silent in its motion, a flawless predator. It bounded towards the hapless transgressor and effortlessly snatched them from the ground. The staggering cultist hardly had chance to gasp before Doghead snapped their chin up and back with a single thumb, separating their skull from the rest of their spine without splitting the skin. Their body fell limp instantly and was dropped to the ground. My legs were aching to carry me away from the scene, but I knew I had to stay put. Not only would I be a target for the shadow monster, but potentially for the cultists. The worst wounds I would receive from my vantage point under the bush would be scrapes and bruises, so there I remained, quaking though I was. The ritual leader was the first to abandon the stone circle altogether, sprinting straight into the woods without looking back, not sparing a moment's thoughts for their flock. The others followed suit in a staggered wave, clearly caught between the protection they believed would hold firm and the vulnerable darkness of the forest. Having claimed 2 victims, Doghead turned its attention to the remaining flames. It lumbered around the edge of the stone circle, sweeping its palm over the torches. They went out without exception, either blown by displaced air through the motion of that huge hand, or perhaps smothered by the shadows that formed this creature. As the last of the lights disappeared, so too did Doghead, its void outline no longer visible against trees that once again stood dark and still. It had reclaimed its cover of night, its motion barely perceptible as the faintest suggestion through leaf-filtered starlight, and it sped away into the gloom. The cult had dispersed, their footfalls and shrieks gradually diminishing to nothing. The circle was silent once again, almost tranquil, save for the scrawled sigils on the stones. I lay still beneath the holly bush until dawn broke and beyond, making certain that no shadows remained to ambush me before I scrambled out to make my way home. In daylight, I could see that the remains of the two victims claimed by Doghead had disappeared in the hours since their slaughter. The creature had managed to remove them both, and I hadn't even noticed its presence. As I write this, I am profoundly conflicted, struck by a heady mix of abject terror and giddy revelation. I'm shaking, shocked to the core by what I witnessed. A monster he may be, but he was once my closest friend, one I thought lost to the passing years and the maturing mind. Before sundown, I will return to the circle and wash those stones clean. It feels disrespectful to leave them so sullied and stained. After all, for better or for worse, I am no longer alone. Sixth story. This story was shared by you/Ain Meg. The Night Watcher. I am a 28-year-old female, and this is an incident that happened to me last week. I live in a small town, small enough for the map to not even display it. I was always an insomniac and stayed awake till 4 in the morning. Every night at around 2 a.m., I could hear a rustling sound of footsteps in my backyard. Before getting any further, I would like to give an outline of my property. It's a long plot with half of the area covered with big trees and the front half has the building that we live in. Our house is a 3-story building and we have a large backyard. I would come home every summer from my university to spend my vacation with my family. I live with my parents and my younger sister. Every summer vacation, I come to stay for about a month and spend really quality time at home. The days are perfect, but the nights are miserable for me. Every night I would stay awake late and had awful experiences regarding the sounds I mentioned earlier. One day, I decided to confront whoever was making such noise at such late hours of night. I was a fool and decided not to wake my parents up. My room was just beside an open corridor that led straight to the backyard. I still remember it to be a Saturday night. As the clock struck 2, I could hear the rustling noise again. I slowly crept down my bed and opened the door. It made a slight noise and the rustling stopped. I took my phone with me and started walking with my flashlight on. I couldn't see anything at first. As I approached through the darkness, I could see a black figure crouching in the distance, hiding behind an oak tree. I was scared shitless at this point, but something in me told me to keep walking. My reaction was involuntary and I had no control over my body. I slowly approached the figure, which at this point had stood up and I could see its yellow glowing eyes. My phone had stopped working at this point, the battery had died out. Moon was the only source of light I could use to traverse my path. As I was inches away from the figure, it let out a shrieking noise and opened its mouth wide. My eyes had adjusted to the dark and I could see hundreds of razor-sharp teeth protruding from its face. The creature was about 8 feet tall, skinny and covered with a slimy substance all over its body. I was frozen with fear and couldn't move my feet. The creature slowly inched close towards me. It started to make a low growl and a weird hissing noise. It was only inches from my face at this point and I could smell its rotting breath. The creature said in a raspy voice, "Fresh flesh." I immediately came back to my senses, turned back and started running towards my room. It was fast and as I was about to enter my room, it blocked my way. "I am the Night Watcher," it rasped. I started sobbing at this point. "I want you," it said. I was petrified and just stood there motionless. The creature then jumped over me and bit a chunk from my hand. I was so scared that my voice had died out in my throat. It started to tear off flesh from my legs. I was deeply in pain and slowly, I fainted. I was awoken next morning by my mother. I saw around me and I could understand that I was laying in a hospital bed. The doctor said that I was attacked by an animal and that I had to stay there for about a week. My parents were standing beside me and my mother was in tears. My arms and legs were wrapped in bandages and I couldn't move, as I was in great pain. Today I am writing this post from the hospital. My scars are healing fast and my eyes are turning yellow. My skin is changing texture and has taken a greasy yellow form. The doctors think I have jaundice. I am afraid to go home and mostly afraid that I'm turning into the next Night Watcher. I hope this post finds someone who knows what I am going through and can help me reverse this transformation. 7th story. This story was shared by you/Ilavimicat. Sinister beings in the Oklahoma forests. I'm so excited to see Mom. My daughter exclaimed. I know you are, honey. Come on now, get in the car. To give you all a little backstory, my name is Michael. My wife divorced me 2 years ago due to me having a crippling drug addiction. Over the course of these 2 years, I became a better person. I stopped taking drugs and hanging out with my old pals, all in the hopes that my wife will come back to me one day. That day never came. One day, I got a call from my ex saying that my daughter missed me and really wanted to see me. After all, you can't keep a child from seeing their own father. I drove 4 hours to Springfield to pick her up and went back home. She stayed with me for 2 weeks. We went to the arcade, the movies, her favorite restaurant, and I even bought her a few dolls here and there. Anyways, the 2 weeks pass by quickly, and it's time to take her back to her mother. You sure you got everything you need, sweetie? This'll be a long drive. Yes, Dad. Can we go now? Of course we can. I started my car and began driving. I lived in Oklahoma City, and my ex lived in Springfield, Missouri. It's a 4-hour-long drive that involves going through the Oklahoma Ancient Forest, which is where we encountered them. Hey Dad, look a. Buzz 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 buzz. Oh hey, your mother is calling. I picked up the phone and accepted the call. Hi. Hello, Michael. So how's Haley? Did she have fun? Yeah, she's alright. We went to movies, the arcade, I even bought her some new toys. Can I talk to her? Haley, here, your mother wants to talk to you. Hi sweetie, did you have F? Dad, watch out. Brakes squealing bang. Hello. Hello. Haley. Michael. We crashed the car, I passed out. The last thing I heard was my ex's worried voice over the phone. I woke up in my house, I was arguing with Samantha. Please Michael. Please. Go to rehab Michael. You have to stop, please. You have to stop for the sake of our little Haley. Please listen to me. I can't. I tried. Then I can't be with you, Michael, I want a divorce. No Samantha, baby, please. I'm trying. Dad. Dad. Dad, wake up. Dad. What happened? We crashed into an elk, Dad. Oh my God. Oh God. Haley. Haley, are you hurt, sweetie? Only a little. Is the elk still alive? Yes, Dad. I think it's hurt. I grabbed my pistol out of the glove box and got out of the car. I saw the elk, covered in blood and barely breathing. Poor thing. Oh, you poor, dumb animal. Haley, close your eyes. Bang. Dad. Why did you shoot it? To put it out of its misery. I moved the elk out of the road and got back in the car. I pressed the gas pedal, but the car didn't move. You gotta be kidding me. I went out of the car and popped the hood open. The engine seemed okay. As I was opening the car door, I heard tree branches rustling and something rapidly approaching me. Fearing for the worst, I turned around and aimed my pistol in the direction of the sound with my finger on the trigger. Suddenly, the noise stopped. I sighed a sigh of relief. Maybe it was just a wild animal. Amidst all the chaos, I didn't seem to notice that Haley didn't make a noise. As all that happened, I turned around to find a broken windshield, and Haley nowhere to be found. Haley? Haley, where are you, sweetie? Haley? I took a flashlight and an extra round of ammunition out of the glove box. I put the magazine in my pocket, turned on the flashlight, and began frantically looking for my daughter. Eventually, I saw the beam from my flashlight hit something. Haley? I said in a distraught voice. Haley, is that you? I got no response. I decided to keep on walking to whatever the thing was until its appearance became more clear as I approached. It was a girl all right, but not Haley. She looked much older, maybe 15 or 16. She was wearing a dirty white hospital gown, and her flesh seemed to be rotting. When I got close enough to clearly see the side of her head, I knew that there was no way in hell that thing was human. I slowly turned around and tried to walk back, but it was too late. It let out an ear-piercing demonic screech that I cannot describe. As I heard it rapidly approaching me, I knew that running was no good. I aimed my gun and fired half the mag at it until it finally collapsed. Thoughts started rushing through my brain. Did these things take Haley? What if they killed her? She's probably shivering out of fear right now. As my brain was processing what just happened, I heard a loud scream coming from the forest. Aha! Haley! Oh my God, that's Haley! I ran as fast as I could in that direction. I ignored the pentagrams and Wendigo skulls hung up on the trees and kept on running towards the direction of the noise, pistol in hand. Suddenly, the fog cleared, the light of the midnight moon shined through the forest. The joy I felt was soon replaced by dread as I saw strange beings around me. There were at least 5 of them. One seemed to look like a Wendigo, the other had the body of a horse and the torso of a human. The only thing I could say about the third one was that he had a tall, slender humanoid body, wore a maroon hoodie with a black cape and carried a strange object in his hand. The fourth one was a fat humanoid figure. In his hand was a rotting, half-eaten corpse of a cat. The fifth one was an old woman. She was tall. Very tall, she wore a black dress and had black paint under her eyes. As I stood in the middle of those creatures, I knew I was hopeless. There's no way the 10 bullets I had left would take out those hideous things. I blinked and saw them all standing not 5 inches away from me. I started shivering, thinking about how gruesome my death will be. They all started chanting something in some sort of language I could not describe. I felt hopeless until the old woman raised her hand, and I saw Haley. Haley! Dad? Dad, help! Let us go. What do you want from us? Why are you doing this to us? Let us go. The old woman grabbed Haley and gave her to the fat one. I saw my daughter screaming her lungs out as the thing bit off her limbs one by one. No. Leave her alone. Haley. It sounded like the woman was laughing. Eventually, my daughter's corpse was dropped right in front of me. So you killed her, now kill me. Kill me. Kill me too. They started to walk away. This was sent to me by an anonymous Reddit user on the 17th of May. I was scrolling through Reddit, not a day later, when I found a post saying the dead body of a man was found in the Oklahoma ancient forest. His death was determined to be suicide via gunshot to the head. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.